Welcome to the Fantasy Audiobook. One Piece. Opening Valley of Gods, Dark Fruit. Chapter 1. Sea Circle Calendar 1484, Canyon of the Gods. A group of people wearing white short sleeves with target patterns printed on their backs were running desperately in the forest. Everyone had a frightened and helpless expression on their faces, as if there were some terrible monsters behind them. Run, they are catching up. Don't get in the way. Lousy needs to live. Boom. Ah! Intensive gunshots rang out from behind them, people kept falling to the ground, and the running crowd became more chaotic. In this chaos, four figures stood close together. No matter how crowded the surrounding crowd was, the four of them always stayed together. There were 3 men and 1 woman among these 4 people. Although one of them was extremely burly, judging from his immature face, he was still a child just like the other 3. His physical strength is obviously much stronger than the other 3 children, but he always follows behind the 3 of them, using his body to act as a barrier for them. A bow and arrow had been deeply inserted into the target pattern on his back. However, even though he was injured, he gritted his teeth and remained silent. The only little girl among the 4 turned around and burst into tears when she saw this scene. She cried anxiously, "Bear boy, get in front of us. Your size is too easy to get hurt from behind." Shang Zai forced a smile on his face, shook his head and said, "Ginny, don't worry about me, I'm fine, as long as you are not hurt." That's what he said, but judging from his weak tone and pale complexion, his current condition is obviously not very good. After all, he is still a child, well, a child over 2 meters tall. When the remaining 2 boys heard Ginny's voice, they all turned to look at Bear. Among them, the boy with the afro head darkened when he saw the bow and arrow on the bear's back. He looked at the other boy beside him and said in a deep voice, "Jie, we have to find a safe place to hide quickly. The bear is seriously injured. Those scum." The boy named Jie is not wearing a white short-sleeved shirt with a target pattern, but a white long-sleeved coat that looks of good quality. He has messy black hair and a delicate face. His dark eyes are calm and determined, and his childish face reveals a hint of maturity that is inconsistent with his age. At this moment, Jiji's face was as sinking as water, and he slowly said, "Nowhere is safe now. We can't stop. Just hold on. The sun is going down and those people will go back soon. But, run, otherwise there will be death." Shang also spoke out at this time. "Ivan Chan, Jie is right, we must not stop here. If I can't hold on anymore, please leave me alone and run away." At only 9 years old, he was actually prepared to die at this moment. Ginny cried even harder after hearing this. "Wu Shangzi, I will never abandon you." Although Jie said he was tough, his steps slowed down unconsciously. This behavior is obviously extremely dangerous, but fortunately it is getting late, and the people chasing behind them may be tired, and their speed is also slowing down. Less than an hour later, the gunfire behind Jie and others gradually subsided until it stopped. To be on the safe side, Jie and others continued running for a while, and finally stopped in front of a small pool. Plop, plop. As soon as Ivan and others stopped, they collapsed to the ground like deflated rubber balls. The bear with an injury on his back fell directly to the ground in a large shape. Jie first looked around cautiously. After confirming that it was safe, he came to sit by the pool and stared at himself reflected on the water in a daze. It has been a week of escape, in this world of One Piece. Jie traveled through time. He was originally an orphan on Blue Star, and he graduated from college with difficulty by relying on work-study programs. Orphans are also a group of people who are prone to time travel. On the night of graduation, he drank with his sons in the dormitory all night long until he was extremely drunk. He only remembered that in the end he was holding on to the wall and wanted to go out to the bathroom, but his feet gave way and he fell down the corridor. He lost consciousness. When he woke up, he had become a child and was still on an isolated island. Regarding the memory of his predecessor, he could not remember anything except that he was named Jie like himself and was 8 years old, as if he had lost his memory. As for why he knew that he had traveled to the world of One Piece, it was because he met the fleeing bears while groping on the isolated island. Not to mention Ginny, Bear and Ivan, 2 distinctive characters in One Piece, are all too familiar to Jie who has read the comics. After learning the names of the 2 people, and looking at Ivan's afro, his pervert energy, and Shang, a 2-meter-tall 9-year-old child, how could Jie not know them? The three Shangs are all well-known good people in the pirate world. Seeing that Jie, a child younger than them, was miserable alone, they directly roped him into their gang without saying anything. From that day on, the group became a group of 4. Based on the current age of Shang and others, as well as their situation, Jie also knows where he is now and what is happening. Canyon of the Gods, the slave hunting ground of celestial dragons. Jie, who had just confirmed the news, suddenly felt tens of thousands of mud horses galloping past. He knows very well what will happen in the Valley of Gods. Soon, the top warriors in the pirate world will gather here to start a fierce fight. Rock's pirate, marine, and celestial dragons ace power, the Knights of God, just thinking about it makes people's heads tingle. And Jie, a celestial dragons armed with a gun, could kill him at any time. What kind of hellish start is this horse riding? Where's the promised novice village? When you come up, you face a full-level boss, and they are all riding horses. Although Jie knew that the big bear would eat the meatball fruit later and use his powers to escape with everyone, but that was when he was reading the comics from a god's perspective, but now he has truly become the prey in this hunting ground. What if he was shot dead by one of the celestial dragons in the middle? What if they failed to find the meatball fruit in the end because of his joining? You must know that in the original comic, he and Ivan also discovered the fruit by accident. In the first few days, Jie still had some luck, thinking that since time travel is real, cheat should also have it right. Like the system. Jie has always imagined hearing a ding in his mind, and then some electronic sound. XX conditions have been met, XX is activated. However, until now, Jie is almost numb to the gunshots and screams every day, and that tinkling sound like celestial music has still not appeared. Recalling his escape experience during this period, Jie finally couldn't hold himself any longer. He punched the water and made a sound through his teeth. Celestial dragons, if Lousy can get out alive, none of you will be able to live well. Splashes of water fell on Jie's face, and he suddenly coughed violently. An abnormal flush appeared on his face, and some steam could even be seen coming out through his skin, as if his blood was burning. It's the same as on. Ivan and others behind him saw this and hurried forward. Ivan supported Jie and said, Jie, are you okay? Your body. Jie calmed down for a while, and then unbuttoned his chest. You could see scars with suture marks crisscrossing the skin at his heart, which looked extremely scary. The skin on his body was also steaming, and his whole body was extremely red, especially the skin around his heart, which was the most obvious, like a red sun imprinted on it. Judging from Jie's appearance, it looks very similar to Luffy's second gear state, but that's just superficial. After Luffy enters the second gear, it is like being on stimulants. He can be said to be full of energy, while Jie will be deflated as soon as he enters this state. He can be as weak as possible. This happens whenever he gets emotional or after strenuous activity. This is obviously a problem inherent in the original body. Judging from the scars and the clothing that is obviously different from other slaves, the original body must have experienced something unusual. However, Jie has not gained the memory of the original person, so he has no clue why there is such a problem. Forget it if you don't have cheat, it even comes with its own debuff. Cursing secretly in his heart, Jie endured the discomfort and slowly sat on the ground. Shang immediately sat up straight and let Jie lean on him. Ginny held the water with her little hands and handed it to Jie's mouth, carefully letting him drink it. The three people's concern was beyond words, which warmed the heart of the depressed Jie. It was a blessing among misfortunes for him to meet these three people. Otherwise, it would be difficult for him to survive until now. As for escaping from the Valley of Gods, he would never even think about it. Jie's only advantage is that he has read the comics and knows some key information, but the problem is that the 6 devil fruits were placed in the Valley of the Gods by the celestial dragons, and the comics did not describe their specific locations. However, according to the mysterious saying that, fruits also choose their owners, as long as you follow the bear, the probability of finding the meatball fruit will be very high. Among these 6 devil fruits, it can be confirmed that they are the meatball fruit and the green dragon fruit. These two alone can be said to represent the top fruits in Paramesha and Zone respectively, and can be selected as prizes by celestial dragons. In addition, the quality of a few pieces is definitely not much different. However, as far as Ji knows, one of the other 4 boxes containing devil fruit is likely to contain the red-haired Shank Sky. To be precise, the number of devil fruit on the island should be 5. Ji guessed that there should be a phoenix and a giant Buddha among them. He was not sure about the last one. He didn't know if Whitebeard had eaten the fruit now. If not, it was probably Junjun. Anyway, no matter which one of these 5 devil fruits you eat, as long as you are not too salty or useless, you will reach the sky in one step, and your future potential will be unlimited. Don't talk about, there are no useless fruit abilities, only useless ability users. Anyone with any brains will know that this sentence is nonsense. Look at Wong Luffy's rubber turned Nika. After all, isn't it just that the ability to blow rubber just can't be used anymore? Can an ordinary bird in Zone be compared to a phoenix of a fantasy beast type? You said that Lu Chi was very powerful after eating an ordinary leopard fruit and could defeat Nika in 2 moves. However, isn't that just because Lu Chi has solid basic skills and excellent physical skills? What if he ate a blue dragon or a giant Buddha? The increase is no more impressive than a leopard fruit. Since we are in the world of pirates, we must eat devil fruit. For Ji, without cheat, a powerful devil fruit is the basis for him to survive in the world of pirates. Thinking of this, Ji raised his head and looked at Ginny seriously. Ginny was locked by Gi's gaze, and she sat upright unconsciously and asked in a low voice. What's wrong, Ji? Ginny, are you sure you have passed on the information that there is the best devil fruit here? Speaking of this, Ginny's dirty little face instantly burst into a confident smile. She patted her chest hard and said, "Don't worry, Ji. This is my expertise. I can be sure that now everyone in the world who can receive the signal has heard the news." After receiving Ginny's confirmation, Ji breathed a sigh of relief. What he was afraid of was the butterfly effect caused by his joining, which resulted in Rock's pirate and marine not appearing in the Valley of the Gods. If these 2 forces had not come, the Valley of the Gods would still be a hunting ground, and they could only be prey to be slaughtered from beginning to end. After all, they can be said to be complete weak chickens now. Except for bears, it would be difficult for them to defeat an ordinary adult. If they want to get the devil fruit, they have to cause chaos in the Valley of the Gods so that they have a chance. Starting from the day when Ginny spread the information, Rox should have arrived by the time, because the number of slaves on the island has been greatly reduced. If Rox didn't come, he might not be able to keep up with the hot food. Maybe tomorrow is when the melee begins. Thinking of this, Ji narrowed his eyes and went through the plan again in his mind. The meatball fruit is the absolute core of this plan. Its ability is the guarantee that he, Shang and others can escape from the Ancient of Gods. This is an absolute god-level Paramesha fruit. As long as he can find it, Ji will definitely eat it without hesitation. He has thought about how to develop the meatball fruit several times in his mind these past few days. Of course, the green dragon fruit is also very good, but Ji feels that compared to the concept-level meatball fruit, the green dragon fruit is still a bit inferior. And although the blue dragon fruit has the ability to fly, it is definitely not enough to be seen in the battlefield of the Valley of Gods where there are so many powerful people today. With his current physique, his flying speed will definitely not be fast. He had to be killed by an airborne hockey attack. What's more, Ji has to consider taking away the 3 bears. Although they have not known each other for a long time, people's relationships are often the strongest in desperate situations. Plus Ji understands the character of these 3 people, which is worth it. Deep friendship. Even though eating the meatball fruit and running away alone was the best solution, Ji looked at the bow and arrow still stuck on the bear's back and shook his head slightly. People can be selfish, but they must not be heartless beasts. The sky has completely darkened, and the celestial dragons outside have all returned to the palace to rest. Now if they hunt slaves, it will be a foul, and their so-called points will be deducted. After several days of hunting, most of the 100,000 slaves who came to the Valley of the Gods were dead and became points for the celestial dragons to obtain rewards. Ji and Shang were lying on the ground with their heads above their heads, looking at the bright moon in the sky. Jie thought to himself that if he had not met Shang and the others, he would have died at the hands of the celestial dragons. Although for some unknown reason, there was no target pattern on his clothes, he was not naive enough to think that he could avoid being hunted by the celestial dragons. Those scum won't care so much. Even if they don't get points for killing Jie, they won't be stingy with a bullet. It's not bad for them to enjoy a little hunting fun. In this rare moment of peace, Ivan and the three of them talked quietly. Ginny turned to the bear and said, "Hey, bear boy, if we can escape, what do you want to do?" The bear replied without hesitation, "Of course I will live happily with everyone." "Haha, of course, but that's not what I'm asking. What I mean is, what is your dream?" "Dream, I want to be someone like Nika. Bring freedom to everyone." Speaking of Nika, Shang's eyes twinkled and his face was full of longing. Ivan suddenly jumped up from the ground. He gave a thumbs up and praised. "What a great dream, Bear, I believe you will succeed." Shang scratched his head in embarrassment and turned his gaze to Jie, who had been silent. Although Shang looks a bit naive, he is actually a very delicate and sensitive person. He can feel that Jie is different from himself and others. The three of them have gone through many hardships, and their minds are far beyond those of their peers, but after all their age, they still have some childishness and innocence. However, Jie, a child who is younger than them, behaves much more maturely than them in many cases, almost like an adult. The reason is actually very simple. Jie, who has lived alone as an orphan in Blue Star for more than 20 years, has experienced the warmth and ups and downs of human relationships while he was growing up. If he had been any more immature, it would have been difficult for him to survive. Fortunately, he was still up to par and had good luck. With the help of the director of the orphanage and some kind-hearted people, he was admitted to university. However, he encountered many problems in the process. Only he himself knows the difficulty. The so-called maturity in Jie is also forced out, which makes him stand out among the four. Shang has already silently regarded Jie as his backbone. So when it comes to dreams, what Shang wants more is Jie's approval. Noticing Shang's gaze, a rare smile appeared on Jie's face. He nodded slightly and said, "Come on, Shang, your dream will definitely come true. I believe you will do better than that Nika. You are better than him." Shang didn't expect that he would receive such praise from Jie, which made him feel flattered and at a loss for a moment. Ivan and Ginny were also very surprised. They stared at Jie without blinking. Ivan suddenly asked, "What about you, Jie? What is your dream?" Jie turned around and said calmly, "I don't have that kind of thing. If I have to say it, I just want to become stronger. Only strength is everything." Ivan was obviously not satisfied with this answer and asked, "Then what do you want to do after you gain power?" "There are many things I want to do, such as helping Bear realize his dream, as well as yours and Guinea's, but if your dream is to make the whole world become like you, forget it." "Ah, Jie-chan, you are so heartless, I am sad." Even so, Ivan was still very moved in his heart, especially Shang and Ginny. Both of them looked at Jie with tears in their eyes, and even their names changed. "Brother Jie." A smile appeared on the corner of Jie's lips, which gave him a lot of favorability. Of course, he didn't mean it, he was serious. Being alone all this time, he naturally attaches great importance to his relationship with the three bears, and he doesn't want to mix in any bad things. However, after this conversation, the relationship between the four of them has become closer, and they are just short of a 4-month sworn brotherhood. Finally, the exhausted Jie, Ivan and Ginny rested on the bear's belly and prepared to fall asleep. Before going to sleep, Jie suddenly said, "Don't forget, no matter who finds the devil fruit, don't hesitate to eat it. Even a small bite is fine, remember." The three bears nodded seriously and said, "I know, brother Jie-chan. Go to sleep. Be sure to get a good rest. We will continue to escape tomorrow." Just as the four of them fell asleep, in the sea not far from the Valley of the Gods, several giant ships were approaching in the direction of the Valley of the Gods like black clouds. Each ship was hoisted with a flag with a skull pattern on a black background. It was obvious that this was a large-scale pirate group. In today's pirate world, the name of this pirate group is very popular, it is Rock's Pirate. In the cabin of the largest pirate ship in the middle, all the key members of the Rocks pirate are gathered. Except for Golden Lion, Shiki and others, there are 3 future 4 emperors here, Whitebeard, Big Mom and Kaido of the Beasts. Today's Kaido is not as good as Whitebeard and the others in terms of status, but his talent is indeed outstanding, and coupled with his somewhat unknown relationship with Big Mom, he is here. Each of these people is a strong man who can dominate outside. However, in this cabin, they are not the protagonists. The real protagonist is the middle-aged man sitting on the throne at the front. The man has a rugged face, wild long black hair hanging casually, a tall figure, and a black cloak. Just sitting there gives people a shuddering sense of oppression, and the word, hockey, the interpretation is vivid and vivid. He is the captain of Whitebeard and others, Rocks. At this moment, Rocks was holding a barrel of wine with one hand and drinking heavily. He drank it all in one go. He slammed the empty barrel down and said angrily, "World government, this time Lousy wants to settle old and new accounts together." Buzz. As soon as he finished speaking, a domineering and ultimate aura erupted from Rocks, and purple-black lightning raged in the cabin. Not long ago, the undercover agents placed by the world government in his pirate group took advantage of the fact that most of them were out and about, and stole the treasure he had left on his nest island. He was really going to explode at the news. After the anger, Rocks fell into regret again. He gritted his teeth and said, "Asshole, if I had known better, I would have just eaten it." Upon hearing this, Charlotte Linlin shrugged and said, "Captain, you'd better calm down first. If you continue like this, all our people will be stunned by you. There will be a fierce battle tomorrow." Everyone else nodded in agreement. Rocks just burst out in a wave of terrifying conquerors in anger. Needless to say, the strength of his conquerors. Even though there are no weaklings in Rocks Pirate, there are still some lower-level crew members who can't stand it. Fainted. Rocks shook his head disdainfully and said, "TCH, those who faint at this level are just trash, don't worry about it at all." Linlin didn't refute and said casually, "Yeah, so too." Shiki and others are also noncommittal. They believe in the belief that the strong is respected, and they don't care about the life or death of the weak at all. Newgate frowned. For him who paid attention to his companions, the behavior of these people made him feel very uncomfortable. He wanted to leave Rocks Pirate more and more. Among this group of people, Newgate was the most stable one. He pondered for a moment and said, "Although I don't know who spread the news some time ago, what is certain is that the world government must have also known about the leak of the news, and should have started to take precautions by now. In addition to the Knights of God on the island, our enemies this time, there will probably be Marine." Even though they know that Newgate has long wanted to leave, Rocks still attaches great importance to Newgate. There is no way. Who said Newgate is strong enough? Who doesn't like such a talent? Rocks also calmed down. He tapped his fingers on the table. After a while, he slowly raised his head with an evil smile on his lips. "Just in time, we should have had a decisive battle with the world government a long time ago. After this battle, I will be the well-deserved king of the world." Valley of Gods. A gorgeous palace is located in the center of the Valley of the Gods. This was the palace of the original king of the Valley of the Gods, but now it has been forcibly commandeered by the celestial dragons. As for the king, he died long ago after the leader of the Knights of the Gods, Fega. Under the sword of Saint Lando Garin. At this time, Jeline was wiping the sword in his hand. Today, the sword was stained with a lot of dirty blood. He had to clean it carefully. His brows were slightly furrowed, as if he had something on his mind, and the action of wiping his sword seemed a little absent-minded. As a celestial dragons among celestial dragons, it's hard to worry about anything in this world. But tonight, he used his privilege to do something that went against the rules of the game. He stared blankly at the sword in his hand and muttered to himself, "I cheated in the end, but I need a reason to accept you, and leave the rest to fate." The next morning, Jie was the first to open his eyes. He stood up from the ground suddenly, woke up the 3 Ivans who were still sleeping, and said, "It's time to go, those guys are going to start hunting soon, we have to hurry up and find devil fruit." After that, Jie took the lead and ran deep into the forest, followed closely by the 3 bears. They did not choose to operate in the dark because the island was already covered with video phone bugs used to monitor slaves. Many people did not know about devil fruit and would choose to rest at night. It would be too deliberate if GJ acted like this. After all, you have been on the run for a day. What are you doing sneakily at night without rest? Once the person under surveillance focuses on that one, it's completely over. Soon after the 4 people left, gunshots were heard one after another, and some unlucky slaves who overslept due to excessive exhaustion fell asleep forever. GJ turned a deaf ear to the sounds behind her and focused on looking for devil fruit. He remembered that the scene in the comic Devil Fruit was in a place with buildings around it. The Valley of the Gods originally had a country, and that scene should be in a town, so his goal was to find the town first. After running for who knows how long, GJ and others ushered in a wave of dazzling sunlight, which also indicated that they had arrived at the end of the forest. Through the forest, a town appeared in their sight. GJ was immediately overjoyed. This was simply the finals of a chicken game. He hurriedly called to the bear and they ran towards the town. It was not just the 4 GJ who came here, but many slaves followed. Many of them were inspired by Ivan's speech before and have been following the 4 GJ. When there are more people, the target becomes bigger. GJ naturally understands this truth, but he did not choose to get rid of these people. Even the closer he got to the city gate, the slower his speed became. They who were running in front were gradually lost to other slaves. Leave it behind. Ivan noticed this and asked puzzledly. GJ-chan, why did you stop? Are you feeling unwell again? GJ nodded and said softly. Yeah, I didn't expect it to happen again at such a critical time. I'm sorry for dragging you down. Upon hearing this, Ivan immediately said. What are you talking about? We're friends. There is nothing to drag you down. Shang and Ginny also said. Brother GJ, didn't you abandon me yesterday? I know you were waiting for me at that time, so let me carry you now. I'm in good health, and it won't affect anything if I carry you on my back. Yes, brother GJ, it's okay to be slower, we will die together. GJ waved his hand and said with a smile. What are you talking about? What about death? We will definitely survive. Besides. Before he could finish speaking, intensive gunshots and the sound of swords cleaving flesh suddenly rang out in the city, followed by screams. Ivan's expression changed and he said in shock. No, there's an ambush in the city. GJ, however, seemed much calmer. An imperceptible smile appeared on the corner of his mouth, and he thought to himself. It's exactly what I thought. No matter how stupid those celestial dragons are, they should know how to put up precautions in such a place in advance. After all, if there is no protection, who lucky guy will accidentally find the devil fruit and eat it? The current situation just proves that there must be devil fruit stored in the city. Naturally, he slowed down to let other slaves go in first to explore the way, and shoot the first bird. The situation has been proven, and now he only needs to rely on his small size to blend into the crowd and rush into the city. Although many people knew that there was an ambush in the city, many people no longer dared to rush into the city, but the celestial dragons behind them were gradually approaching, and they had no other choice but to rush in. GJ shouted to the stunned bear. Bear, lower your head later, your target is too big. According to the original plot, the bear should be able to successfully eat the chicken without any danger in the end, but again, in order to avoid the possible butterfly effect, GJ couldn't help but give some instructions. Shang nodded vigorously. He arched his body, blended into the crowd with GJ and others, and poured into the city together. Facing the hail of bullets, the GJ quartet successfully rushed into the city. In the process, the bear was injured due to his large size, but the impact on his actions was not great. After entering the city, the 4 of them did not dare to waste a moment, looking for devil fruit everywhere. Shang was about to enter a gorgeous house. Suddenly, a man wearing a black suit and sunglasses appeared in front of him, raising his leg and kicking on his stomach. The bear looked much bigger than the lean man in a suit, but after being hit, it flew backwards like a large rubber ball and collapsed the wall behind it. GJ and the others rushed over when they heard the noise. Seeing the trembling bear lying in the ruins, Ginny burst into tears and kept calling for the bear cub. Ivan also called for the bear anxiously. GJ had already rushed to the bear's side. Fortunately, the bear did not lose consciousness. When he saw GJ, he coughed violently several times and struggled to straighten up. The attack from the man in the suit just now was obviously not easy to bear. Shang endured the severe pain in his abdomen and said weakly, "This man is very strong. Brother Ji, take Jinny and the others and run away. I'll hold him back." Ji looked solemn, thinking that he would be in trouble this time. The man in the suit didn't expect the bear to stand up and speak. He raised his eyebrows and said, "You are that brat from the Bacania tribe, you are in pretty good shape." As he spoke, he put his hands in his pockets and walked towards Ji and the others step by step, saying as he walked, "What have you four brats been sneaking around looking for since you entered the city without running for your lives? This is really suspicious." Ivan rushed to Ji and Shang, opened his arms, and shouted, "Don't even think about hurting them." The man in the suit didn't take Ivan seriously at all. He slowly raised a hand. Ivan closed his eyes subconsciously. Ji suddenly said, "You are not qualified to attack us, are you? The only ones qualified to kill us now are the celestial dragons. Do you want to break the rules of the game?" The man in the suit hovered his hand in midair. Although he was unhappy at being yelled at by a slave, what Ji said actually hit the point. He is indeed not qualified to take action against Ji and the others, these are precious points for his masters. But these four brats were really suspicious. They almost let the Bacanian brat enter the house behind him. This house was not a good place to enter. If the contents inside were lost, his life would not be saved. After thinking for a moment, he spat on the ground and said impatiently, "Forget it, it's just four brats. You won't live long anyway. Get out of here and don't hang around here." Hearing this, Ji didn't hesitate for a second. He and Ivan Jinny helped the bear up and left towards the other side without looking back. On the way, Ivan lowered his head and whispered to Ji Ji, that house. Ji knew what Ivan meant, and he said categorically, "There must be devil fruit in that house." When he said this, Ji tried hard to suppress his inner excitement. He was afraid that he would suddenly become ill. From the performance of the man in the suit, it is obvious that there is no silver in this place. Even a fool knows that there is something important in that house. What else can this thing be besides devil fruit? Jinny didn't show much excitement when she heard the news. She frowned and said, "But with that person here, how are we going to get in? Besides, Shang's eye is so seriously injured this time." The bear wanted to say something, but he couldn't stop coughing. Ivan supported the bear and said with an ugly face, "That fool, he beat the bear like this." Hearing Shang's cough, Ji felt uncomfortable. He clenched his fists and said coldly, "That guy will definitely pay the price, I promise." Boom boom boom. As soon as he finished speaking, a series of explosions sounded, and thick smoke began to fill the sky over the town. Immediately afterwards, a loud roar resounded across the sky. "Dragon idiots, are you ready to face my wrath?" Ji is not surprised but happy. There is only one person here who dares to scold celestial dragons like this, and that is Rox. In the palace in the center of the town, Saint Satan, one of the 5 elders, changed his expression and disappeared in the next second, arriving outside the palace. Feeling the approaching terrifying auras, Saint Satan took out a phone bug and said in a deep voice, "Saint Jeline, immediately lead the Knights of God back to defend the royal city. The Rox pirate is here." The phone bug also responded quickly, "I know, leave it to us." Shortly after the Rox pirate arrived at the Valley of the Gods, several marine warships followed closely. The marine marshal rushed off the warship first, and pursued the Rox pirate with Garp and other marine officers. However, Marine was still a step behind. Rox pirate had already appeared in the town where Ji was. Rox and others landed on a street. Rox, the leader, looked up at the royal city in the center, and Sardan also looked at it. The two people's eyes met, and Rox didn't say anything nonsense, and punched Wangcheng directly in the air. A wave of red and black energy mixed with electric arcs burst out from his fist, and everything in its path, whether it was people or objects, was blown to pieces. Saint Satan's face was a bit ugly. His strength was certainly not weak, but it was still far behind Rox. Facing Rox's menacing punch, he wanted to hide, but there were many weak celestial dragons in the palace. If he hid, he would be dead. Tear. The clothes on Saint Satan's lower body were suddenly torn apart, 8 black spider legs stretched out, a pair of black horns sprouted from his head, and his whole body swelled. He raised the crutch in his hand and bravely faced Rock's attack. The moment he touched it, the ground he was on suddenly collapsed, and the people were gradually retreating. Just when they were about to be unable to withstand it, the Knights of God suddenly Saint Chongjilan finally arrived and helped Saint Satan break the attack with a single blow of his sword. Seeing that the attack was blocked, Rox just smiled contemptuously. He had plenty of time to deal with these celestial dragons today. In a small alley not far behind him, the four of Jie witnessed what just happened. The actions of the max-level boss were so terrifying. Shang and Jinny were stunned speechless by Rock's strength. Ivan's voice trembled. Then, is that the legendary Captain Rox? He can cause so much damage with just one punch. What a monster. This is also the first time that Jie actually sees the actions of the top warriors in the pirate world. This kind of shock is far beyond what reading comics can compare with. But he didn't feel a trace of fear. Instead, the blood in his body began to boil unconsciously. This abnormal situation made him very confused. He had been deliberately controlling his emotions, but it seemed like he was ill again. The perception of Rox and others is so sharp that this subtle movement immediately caught their attention. Jie and the four people who poked their heads out of the alley were immediately spotted by them. When they saw a few children, the Rox pirate people suddenly lost interest. Lin chuckled softly. Well, it turns out they are just a few brats. Are these brats captured as prey? Rox held his chin and glanced around Jie with interest. That kid is interesting. He must have had fighting spirit just now. Do you still want to fight me after seeing my strength? Jie could no longer care about the attention of Rox and others at this moment. He was clutching his heart and cursed in a low voice. What's going on? Slow down. Ivan and the other three were also panicked when they saw Jie's condition, thinking that he was ill. However, Jie didn't feel weak at all. Instead, he felt a strong excitement. In short, he wanted to touch a brick and rocks. In fact, his current strength is also surprisingly strong. He is covering his chest with one hand and clasping the other hand on the eaves of the wall. That part has been broken by him. This is the first time that this abnormal situation has happened. Jie is even thinking. Isn't this my return to glory? Rox over there has withdrawn his gaze. Jie has only aroused his slightest interest. The Knights of God led by Saint Jelline and Saint Satan are staring at this place. He shook his neck a few times and said casually, Newgate, how about using your ability to give those celestial dragons a welcome gift? Newgate, who had long blonde hair, took a step forward. He clenched his right fist, a translucent white halo appeared, and then he punched it out hard. Crack, there was a sound like a shattering mirror, and several cracks spread from Newgate's fist. In an instant, the entire valley of the gods shook and the houses collapsed. This is the ability of Paramesha Shock Fruit, and in the hands of Newgate, who is now in his prime, its power has been interpreted by Ultimate. The bear behind had already used its body to protect Jie and the three of them, resisting the crumbling masonry. However, the ensuing earthquake had begun to change the terrain, and the bear rolled Jie and the three of them out, and was finally buried under a pile of rocks. Over at the palace, Saint Garin has ordered several members of the Knights of God to rescue the celestial dragons. Newgate's attack was actually not as powerful as Rox's initial punch, but the trouble it caused was much greater than that punch. I don't know how many weak celestial dragons were killed by that punch. Saint Sardan couldn't stand it anymore. He kept stalling for time because he knew that the Knights of God here alone would be difficult to fight against the Rox pirate, not to mention the distraction of rescuing the celestial dragons, so he had to wait for Marine to come. Finally, when he was waiting so long, the Marines led by Marine Marshal Sora finally arrived, and Garp shouted. Where is that guy Roger? He was still enjoying his vacation. If Sengoku hadn't told him that Roger would show up, he wouldn't have bothered to come over and take care of the celestial dragon's shit. Sengoku, who was still Admiral, pulled him and said in a deep voice. Don't worry about Roger for now. Look, the Rox pirates are all here. I'm afraid today's matter will be more troublesome than we expected. Admiral Zephyr looked around and saw the ruins everywhere. He frowned and said. What I just said was Newgate's ability. This destructive power is really terrifying. Rox was not surprised by Marine's arrival. He looked at Marine opposite and said with a mocking face. Hey, as expected of the celestial dragon's dogs, they all came to protect their master, right? Marine's side was immediately aroused by these words, but no one refuted it for a while, because what Rox said was really the same thing. The fiery-tempered Garp immediately exploded. His fists were covered in pitch-black weaponry. Garp's figure disappeared from the spot and reappeared in the sky above Rox and others the next second. He swooped down like a comet, his metallic fist shining with terrifying power directed towards the rocks below. Fist bone meteor. Rox crossed his arms and didn't even raise his head. Newgate jumped up and collided with Garp in midair with his fists wrapped in shock waves. Boom! The roar mixed with the sound of shattering resounded through the sky, and the aftermath of the collision between the two instantly dispersed the clouds over the Valley of the Gods. The dazzling sunlight shone on the earth, and Rox grinned, showing a very bright smile. Newgate and Garp collided in midair and separated at the same time, each falling back into the team. A pile of stones shook a few times, and the bear's head popped out. Then he opened the stone, revealing the 3 GJ in his arms. Looking at those familiar faces, GGE's pupils narrowed. The situation on the field at this moment is that Rox Pirate is facing enemies from both sides, with Marine in front and Knights of God behind. However, Rox is still extremely confident. GJ didn't think Rox was arrogant at all. Although Rox's strength was not shown in the comics, he just saw it. Just a flat of forced Satan Saint to open up, although there was Satan Saint in it. It was because he had to protect the celestial dragons behind him, but it was enough to illustrate his terrifying strength. But the most outrageous thing is his crew, the young Newgate, Linlin, Kaido, and the golden lion Shiki without the rudder on his head. What a dream lineup this is. Whoosh whoosh. Several more figures arrived. It was Saint Satan and the Knights of God rushing over to join Marine. As soon as Saint Satan arrived, all the monitors hidden in the town also gathered. They were uniformly dressed in black suits and stood neatly behind Saint Satan. Rox didn't take this group of people seriously at all. He lowered his arms and stared at Saint Satan opposite and said, "You world government are so brave. You dare to steal my Rox treasure. Today Lousy not only wants to get his own things back, but he also wants to let everyone know who the master of this world should be." Saint Satan had regained his composure, and said calmly with a calm expression, "The celestial dragons are the masters of the world. Everyone and everything in this world should belong to the celestial dragons. You are just a despicable pirate." Not only did Rox Pirate feel uncomfortable when he said this, but even the Marines behind Saint Satan had expressions of disgust on their faces. Only the members of the Knights of God looked matter of fact. Rox was really disgusted. He waved his hand and shouted angrily, "Come on, Lousy will destroy you celestial dragons today." As soon as the words fell, before the two parties started, GJ on the other side had already called Ivan and the three of them to run wildly towards the distance. Now they are not qualified to be spectators. GJ and others hadn't run very far. Behind them, the collision between the top hockey's counterattack and fruit abilities broke out instantly, and the roar was endless. Now the Valley of the Gods has completely become a battlefield for the gods. Ivan couldn't help but look back and saw countless boulders floating up into the sky and then falling down like a heavy rain. GJ also noticed this scene. He pulled Ivan, who was already dumbfounded, and said, "That's Lion Fruit's ability. Run quickly. If you get affected, you'll be in trouble." Ivan came back to his senses, swallowed his saliva and sighed. "The power of devil fruit is so terrifying. Can we achieve this level if we eat one?" GJ narrowed his eyes and said firmly, "Yes, at least those devil fruits given as prizes by the celestial dragons will not be worse than that lion fruit." After saying that, he continued to take the lead and ran towards the gorgeous house where the man in the suit was before. Now that all the celestial dragons' minions in the town have been summoned by Sardan to participate in the battle, no one is paying attention to them anymore. This opportunity must be seized. Returning to the previous position, the original house had turned into a pile of ruins. GJ did not hesitate at all. He rushed to the ruins and directly pushed away the rubble with a pair of fleshy palms. Ivan and the other three saw GGE's actions as well. Learn from others. No one would be lazy at this time, because the aftermath of the battle between those monsters could kill them at any time. Boom! The battle between Rox and others set off a gust of wind. On the ruins, GGE's robes were blown by the wind, and his small body was crumbling in the raging wind. GJ gritted his teeth and continued digging hard, muttering in his mouth. Devil fruit, if you really know how to choose a master, please choose me. Let's climb to the top of this world together. His nails were worn almost to the point of disappearing, and bright red blood seeped out from his fingertips, dripping onto the broken stones and tiles below and converging into a bright red line of blood that slowly flowed in along a gap. GJ raised his arm and rubbed his blurred eyes, subconsciously digging in the direction of the blood flow. After a day of escaping, GG's body was already overwhelmed. He struggled to move a stone, staggered and almost fell down. At this moment, a faint golden light flashed under the stone. GJ quickly took a closer look and found that it was a wooden box, with only a corner of the gold plate exposed. GJ felt the blood all over his body surge up. He forced himself to calm down and dug out the wooden box with trembling hands. Fortunately, the box was not locked, presumably to make it easier for some weak celestial dragons to open it. Even the weak GJ could open it effortlessly. At this moment, this box was Pandora's box in GG's heart. He held his breath and opened the lid of the box. A strange purple fruit that looked like a pineapple lay quietly in the box. Seeing the appearance of this fruit, GG's eyes widened, and a thunder flashed through his mind. This dark fruit. The appearance of dark fruit has appeared in the comics. As the fruit that Blackbeard has been waiting for more than 20 years, GJ is very impressed by the appearance of this fruit. The appearance of this fruit was beyond GG's expectation. It can be said to be a big surprise. Because dark fruit is definitely a top-notch devil fruit. Although it cannot be elementalized like other logias, the effect of elementalizing it later is basically zero, and it is of no use other than bullying the miscellaneous fish. Except for a few elements that have powerful attack attributes, some logia have directly become version abandonments and a complete joke. But dark fruit is different. Not to mention its bug that can make people with abilities lose their abilities. What GJ values most is the natural disaster it represents, that is, the black hole that annihilates everything. Within 3 seconds of confirming that what was in her hand was dark fruit, GJ opened her mouth and bit into it. The lavender pulp mixed with juice entered the mouth, and an indescribable taste permeated GG's mouth. His face turned purple, and his stomach was already churning before he could swallow it. Fortunately, devil fruit only needs 1 bite to gain abilities. Otherwise, with GG's current, small mouth, there's no telling how much suffering he would have suffered. Throwing away the fruit that had turned into an ordinary fruit, GJ stood there for a while, and a strange feeling came over him. He felt as if he had an extra sense, as if he had an extra free movement. Limbs are the same. GJ stretched out his right hand and put it in front of his eyes, trying to activate his ability. His right hand instantly turned into darkness, and wisps of black smoke rose into the sky. He stared at his right hand in confusion. From this moment on, he was the master of dark fruit, the controller of darkness. GJ-chan. Ivan's shout interrupted GG's thoughts. He looked back and saw Ivan holding up a bear paw-shaped devil fruit and shouting excitedly. Look what I found. Devil fruit. GG's pupils shrank. Just from the appearance, it can be seen that the fruit in Ivan's hand must be a meatball fruit. Finding the meatball fruit is of course a happy event, but Ivan's character is already out of the ordinary. His current behavior was too flamboyant. In fact, Ivan had good intentions. He didn't know that GJ had eaten dark fruit, and GJ had always shown a desire for devil fruit before, so after finding devil fruit, he immediately thought of it. It's for GJ. Ivan's voice is really loud, and the words, devil fruit, are also very sensitive. Whether it's the Rock's side or the world government side, who doesn't have hearing far beyond ordinary people? As soon as Ivan called out devil fruit, the two parties who were fighting immediately stopped in unison, and several dangerous eyes locked on Ivan who was holding the fruit, making him freeze in place. In fact, Ivan's performance is already very good. You must know that there are many owners of Conqueror's hockey among these people. The fact that he can avoid being stunned shows that his qualifications are better than most ordinary people. Saint Satan also recognized the meatball fruit at a glance, and immediately called Saint Jaline to snatch it. However, Saint Jaline did not make any move. His attention was entirely on GJ, who was not far away from Ivan, with a subtle expression. Marine was mostly sighing that a few children would appear here. Garp curled his lips, thinking that it must be the fault of the celestial dragons again. Rox didn't care about that much. Before Rox said anything, Linlin rushed over, aiming directly at Ivan, who was frozen in place. "Little devil, hand over the devil fruit to me." Regardless of Rox's ugly expression, Linlin chose to leave the battlefield after seeing the meatball fruit. She was extremely fast and was about to rush to Ivan. In the blink of an eye, Gijay suddenly raised his right hand, which had turned black, and aimed it at Ivan. A black vortex appeared in his palm. Universal pull. Buzz. The powerful gravity was released through the dark vortex. Ivan and the meatball fruit in his hand flew towards Gijay at high speed under the pull of gravity. Linlin also missed and showed a confused expression on her face. The big guys in the distance also had different expressions when they saw this scene. Rox stared at Gijay with an unbelievable look, focusing his eyes on the dark vortex in his hand. "Is it that kid just now? That ability, could it be?" Satan Sheng's face was rarely shocked. He was not shocked by the ability of the dark fruit, but by Gijay's face. "Who is that kid?" He suddenly looked at Jilinsheng, who was silent at the side. Jilinsheng had a complicated expression at the moment. He murmured, "He is obviously dead, but he just happens to look like." Everyone had their own thoughts. After a brief moment of confusion, Linlin turned around and looked at Gijay with a playful look, and said in a frivolous tone, "I didn't expect that you, a little kid, are also a person with abilities. It seems that you have a good ability. Well, you are handsome, but you have taken my prey. Be obedient and give me the fruit. How about following me in the future?" Linlin is not fat yet. She is a hot and beautiful woman. Her voice is even a little charming. Even so, Gijay still had the image of the drooling, bloated crazy ant behind him in his mind, and he couldn't help shuddering. Linlin felt that Gijay was scared by her. She laughed and walked slowly towards the scared Gijay. Just when Linlin thought that the meatball fruit was about to become hers, Gijay lifted Ivan's hand and squeezed it hard, and Ivan immediately cried out in pain. Taking this opportunity, Gijay grabbed the meatball fruit and was about to stuff it into Ivan's mouth, but he still underestimated Linlin's speed. In just a breath, Linlin had already rushed in front of Gijay, and the unlucky Ivan was kicked away by her like a ball. She squatted down, pinched Gijay's arm, which seemed extremely slender to her, with her fingers, and said in a bad tone, "Little ghost, you are not very honest, huh?" Linlin's face suddenly changed, and she suddenly raised an arm covered with armed color. The moment she completed this action, a black shadow holding a sword appeared and chopped Linlin's arm with a sword. Clang! The person who came was actually Jilinsheng. After he chopped the sword, he immediately retreated with the force, and his figure fell not far away, staring at Linlin coldly with a pair of eyes. Linlin retracted her arm, and the armor color faded. She could see a clear red mark on her fair skin. Even though she had a terrifying defense, she felt a dull pain in her arm. Frowning, she didn't expect that the leader of the Knights of God would abandon the main battlefield and come to deal with her. She felt very troubled and thought to herself, "It seems that celestial dragons also value this meatball fruit. Then I must get it, and the blue dragon fruit." The message sent by Ginny clearly mentioned the meatball and the blue dragon fruit. Before coming, Linlin had already seen the devil fruit illustration. Her main purpose of coming to the Valley of Gods this time was to get the blue dragon fruit. She already had the soul fruit, so of course she didn't snatch it for herself to eat. She used it to seduce Kaido, who was reluctant to surrender. Linlin has never really surrendered to Rox. She has long wanted to leave Rox Pirate and work alone. Kaido is the person she likes. She also plans to tie Kaido with the blue dragon fruit and let him follow her in the future. Originally, she only wanted to use the meatball fruit as a substitute, but St. Jalen's attack made her pay more attention to the meatball fruit. However, her thoughts went astray. Jilinsheng was not interested in the so-called meatball fruit at all. He turned his head and looked at Gijay, who was ignored by Linlin, and his eyes stayed on Gijay's open chest for a moment. Seeing those criss-crossing scars, his eyes flickered and he said, "Hey, what's your name?" Gijay was stunned for a moment. He naturally knew this Saint Jilin, the leader of the Knights of God, the absolute elite among the celestial dragons, and his terrifying strength. How could such a person pay attention to a child like himself? Is it because of the dark fruit ability he just showed? Come to think of it, neither Linlin nor Jie can resist Jie at present, not to mention that this Jeline saint does not seem to have any malicious intent. My name is Jie. Hearing Ji's name, Jeline Sheng's body trembled slightly, and he asked eagerly. Where's your full name? Jie was stunned for a while. It seemed that Jeline Sheng knew him. To be precise, he knew his predecessor. However, he had no memory of his predecessor at all, so he had to say honestly. I can't remember what happened before. I only know that my name is Jie now, and Jie is my full name. Ji's words are truer than gold, and the main theme is sincerity. Jeline Sheng nodded thoughtfully and whispered. Have you lost your memory? You can remember your name but forget your surname. Jie asked tentatively upon seeing this. You know me, so can you tell me what my full name is? The two of them were talking to each other, and Linlin was directly reduced to the background. Veins popped up on her forehead and she shouted angrily. That's enough. What's the name without a name? What do you think I am? She roughly grabbed the meatball fruit and raised her feet to leave. Just when Jie thought that the meatball fruit was about to be taken away, Jeline Sheng moved again. He just raised his sword and swung it, and a sword energy emitting red and black lightning burst out, aiming directly at Linlin. Linlin didn't dare to raise her eyebrows, so she had to cross her arms in front of her chest to catch the sword energy, but the meatball fruit fell out of her hands and rolled to Ji's feet. Ivan had already been kicked several meters away by Linlin. Jie flew up and kicked the meatball fruit at his feet towards the bear, shouting. Bear, eat the meatball fruit quickly. The bear and Ginny were still in a stunned state. Ji's shouts woke them up. The bear didn't care anymore. He opened his mouth and pounced towards the flying meatball fruit. His mouth was much bigger than Jie, and he swallowed the meatball fruit directly. Soon, a pair of very cute-looking meat pads appeared in the bear's palm. Seeing the bear swallowing the meatball fruit in one gulp, Linlin was so angry that his lungs were about to explode. He looked at Jie as if he wanted to eat someone. However, at the moment, she was powerless, because Jeline Shengzheng was suppressing her tightly, not giving her any time to free her hands. Taking this opportunity, Jie raised his hand to suck Ivan in front of him and shouted to the bear. Bear, use your ability to send us away. Control your strength and just shoot. Jie had also told the bears before how to use the ability of the meatball fruit to move quickly. In addition, the bear itself was indeed very compatible with the meatball fruit, so after hearing Ji's words, he directly took the photo. He glanced at himself and arrived in front of Jie almost teleporting. Jie spread out his hands, and dark vortices emerged from each of his open palms. The strong gravity pulled Ginny and Ivan, who was kicked away. During this process, Jie kept paying attention to Sardan, who was fighting with Rock's pirate over there, because according to the original storyline, this guy would come to interfere with the bear. However, Satan had no intention of coming over from beginning to end. Jie guessed that it might be because Jeline left the battlefield. After all, before the Roger pirates arrived, it was still difficult to face Rock's pirate with the current marine plus a Sardan, and this was because there were so many actors in Rock's pirate. Shang raised his hand again, preparing to use his ability again to send himself and Jie away from the Valley of Gods. Jeline has been paying attention to Jie. He also saw the bear's ability and guessed that Jie was going to run away. When the bear's hand was about to touch Jie, Jeline suddenly shouted to Jie. Boy, remember, your last name is Fegalando. Bo. The meatball fruit ability was activated, Ji's figure disappeared in place, and the bear wanted to save some more slaves, but Rox didn't know why he went crazy, and suddenly released his conquerors, and the entire Valley of Gods instantly thundered and lightninged, like the end of the world. He stared at the place where Jie disappeared with red eyes, his roar echoed through the sky. Asshole, where did you send that kid? That's my fruit. Sengoku and Garp looked at each other and wondered, why is Rox so crazy? What fruit? Meatball fruit. Although Shang has excellent qualifications, he is still young after all. He was shocked into a daze by Rock's conquerors. When he came to his senses, he did not hesitate and immediately used his ability to send himself out. Sardan shouted to Garen, Garen, come back quickly. Jeline stood there in silence for a moment, then got rid of Linlin and rushed towards the battlefield that belonged to him. Linlin had no intention of going back. Without Jalen's interference, she began to focus on looking for the green dragon fruit. In the distance, Sardin breathed a sigh of relief when he saw Galen returning, and whispered, "That fruit originally belonged to you." Galen shook his head and said calmly, "I'm not very interested in devil fruit. I just came here to enjoy the fun of hunting. What's more, he is still alive, which means that Vegapunk's experiment was successful. In this case, there is nothing more suitable for him than that fruit." Quote. Sardin opened his mouth, as if he wanted to say something more, but Rox did not give Sardin a chance to speak. He rushed over like a black lightning, and pounded Sardin hard with his angry fist. Garp and Sengoku, who were standing in front of Sardin, did not know whether intentionally or unintentionally, but they moved away. Garen did not step forward to stop him because he was worried. The surrounding celestial dragon's guards were loyal enough, and they rushed forward without fear of death. However, in Rock's eyes, they were no different than ants, and some of them were directly blasted into a ball of blood mist. Sardin's crutches flew out in a spin, and he received a heavy punch on the face, performing a stunt on the spot. Sengoku looked like he wanted to laugh but didn't dare to laugh, while Garp spurted out with a loud sound. Crane on the side stretched out his hand and pinched him hard on the waist. Garp, who was armed and strong, actually broke his defense, and the expression on his face was worse than crying. Still ugly. The people in Rock's pirate didn't have any psychological baggage. They all laughed loudly and almost rubbed Satan's old face on the ground. After suffering a heavy blow, Sardin stood up in a short while. After all, he was a Zone Phantom Beast-type Esper, and his recovery ability was extremely good. But looking at his slightly trembling look, it was obvious that Rock's angry punch was not that comfortable. After getting up, Sardin first glanced around Marine with cold eyes, and then looked at Garp a few more times. Garp was picking his nose, looking nonchalant. Garp is now an important combat force. Even if Sardin was angry, he couldn't vent it on the spot. He had to hold back his anger and issue an order to Marine Marshal Kong. Destroy the Rock's pirate, leaving no one behind. Rock snorted and said disdainfully, "It's just you. After today, Lousy will be the new king of the world. Come on, kids." The two sides collided again. Facing the combination of the Knights of God and Marine, Rock's pirate showed no sign of decline, but showed faint signs of suppression. Rox also became more and more excited as he played. According to his plan, it was best for him to eat dark fruit. With the blessing of dark fruit, his chances of winning would definitely increase a lot. But the performance of Marine and world government made him feel that this was just the case. This was because some people in the pirate group were fishing. The most hardworking among Rock's subordinates is Kaido. Now he is just a stupid young man, and the mace in his hand is dancing so hard that it has an afterimage. He just sees who hits whom, and with those the captain's performance was in stark contrast. Rox saw this and was already planning to give Kaido a promotion and a raise after he won the battle. However, the idea of opening champagne at halftime has always been a taboo. Just when Rox was holding a Marine officer's collar and preparing to break his neck, a black and red sword light roared across the sky. God avoids. Rox's pupils shrank, threw Marine away from his hand, and retreated quickly. The sword's slash struck the ground, stirring up smoke that filled the sky. The smoke dissipated, and a bottomless ravine appeared before everyone's eyes. Aha! A figure wearing a red cloak descended from the sky, with a confident smile on the face. Garp, who had always been lacking in interest, suddenly roared as if he had been given blood. Roger, you idiot, finally showed up. Roger turned his head and smiled at Garp, then pointed his sword at the ugly-looking Rox and said in a deep voice, "Rox, you are too dangerous and I can't let you continue." Rox was really put off by Roger's remarks. He only understood one thing now, that is, as a pirate, Roger actually chose to side with the world government to deal with him. Newgate used an air shock to force back Garen, who had been fighting with him for a long time. You could see that there were several staggered stab wounds on his exposed chest, with blood coming out from time to time. The golden armor that Garen wore that belonged to the Knights of God was also shattered in several places, and blood flowed from the corners of his mouth. Newgate in his prime and Shockfruit were not that easy to deal with. The battle between the two of them just now was very fierce. If Roger hadn't suddenly appeared, one of them would have been killed today. Newgate squinted at Roger, his eyes flickering, not knowing what he was thinking. Roger certainly didn't come alone. After a while, Deputy Captain Pluton Rayleigh arrived with other crew members. They stood behind Roger and confronted the Rock's pirate. At this time, the arrival of the Roger pirates can be said to have completely reversed the situation of the war. Rox looked extremely ugly, and now he wanted to eat Roger alive. The members of Rock's pirate had different expressions. Except for Linlin, who didn't know where he was running, most of them were already looking around, looking like they wanted to run away. Rox was naturally aware of this, and he couldn't think about it anymore. He roared, raising his momentum to the extreme, and the entire sky was instantly covered with a shadow. Clenching his fists, the Black Conqueror's lightning crackled. Rock's figure was like electricity, and his terrifying aura locked Roger tightly. He had already made up his mind. Even if he failed today, he would have to kill Roger, the pirate scum. Facing Rox, who was attacking with all his strength, Roger looked solemn. He wrapped Conqueror's around Ace, one of the 12 skills of the sharp knife, in his hand, and rushed forward to face Rox. However, as soon as the collision occurred, Roger felt that the arm holding the sword was almost losing consciousness. Rock's strength was even more terrifying than he expected. Seeing that Roger was in a bad situation, Pluton Rayleigh immediately wanted to draw his sword to help, but Garp on Marine's side was faster than him. A black iron fist fell from the sky. Rox was only thinking about killing Roger in front of him. Without noticing, Garp punched him away and he retreated back. Looking at Roger Garp standing side by side in front of him, Rox was so angry that he couldn't hold back 4 words for a long time. Absolutely disgusting. He originally wanted to take a preemptive strike to stabilize the lax morale of the army, but he was frustrated and the situation became increasingly unfavorable to him. However, at this moment, Linlin, who had been finding no such person, suddenly turned back, holding a cyan devil fruit in his hand. While everyone was fighting, she used the ability of the soul fruit to give her soul to a piece of land, and finally obtained the azure dragon fruit. Rox was very pleased to see Linlin reappearing, thinking that this woman still had some conscience, but before he could be happy for too long, Linlin's words almost made him petrified on the spot. Kaido, you silly boy, why are you working so hard? Look what I found. Come with me. Kaido was overjoyed when he saw the blue dragon fruit, and actually rushed towards Linlin. After the two met, they turned around and left, disappearing from everyone's sight in a few breaths. Quote. After a brief silence, Newgate suddenly sighed. Now he was extremely disappointed with Rock's pirate. He put Yunchi on his shoulders, turned around, and walked away without saying a word. His speed was not fast, but the world government had no intention of stopping him at all, and just allowed Newgate to leave here in a swaggering manner. Shiki took a puff of his cigar. He was the calmest person on the field. He was a lion fruit user. As long as he wanted to leave, almost no one could keep him. Ever since Linlin and Kaido disappeared, Rox had been standing there quietly, and he didn't say another word even after Newgate left. But Roger and Garp standing opposite him suddenly felt a suffocating and terrifying momentum. Rox, who was in a desperate situation, was already desperate. Sardin's old face already showed an expression of victory, but his body remained tense. He knew that Rox was in the most dangerous state at this time. Rox slowly raised his head, and a cold voice slowly came out of his mouth. Roger, Celestial Dragons, Marine, you all deserve to die. Boom. There was a loud noise, and the ground collapsed instantly. Rox led a few loyal men and rushed into the enemy camp. For a moment, countless broken limbs and broken arms were flying in the sky, and the entire battlefield was filled with blood mist. The world government, Marine and Roger pirates no longer remained, and all the top combat forces swarmed in to encircle and suppress Rox, who had gone crazy in the center of the battlefield. There was no fear on Rox's face. He threw off the cloak that was stained red with blood and laughed wildly. Let's go together. Lousy as Rox. ... After an unknown amount of time, the roar that echoed throughout the Valley of Gods gradually subsided. At the edge of the Valley of the Gods, Newgate pushed a wooden boat into the sea, then jumped into the boat. Rock's pirate's ship had long been destroyed by the marine warships that came from behind, so he had to build this relatively solid boat himself. Looking back in the direction of the Valley of Eyes, Newgate shook his head and said softly, "Goodbye, Captain Rox." After saying that, He fumbled for a sky-blue devil fruit from his arms and thought to himself. I actually picked up a devil fruit on the way here. It must have been prepared by the celestial dragons. It gave me an advantage. On the marine warship, Sengoku was sitting on the bench wiping the blood on his body. There were too many Marines injured in this battle, and the military doctors were already overwhelmed. Relying on his strong physique, he did not choose to let the military doctors treat him, and gave up his limited resources to other Marine soldiers. Just as he was holding cotton with tweezers and trying to press it on the wound, there was a bang and Garp pushed the door open and came in. Hey, Sengoku, are you okay? PFF'd. Looking at the tweezers inserted into the wound, Sengoku's mouth twitched and he turned his head to get angry. Garp suddenly threw out a wooden box and said carelessly, "See what I found." There were several pieces of gold foil on the box, and you could tell that the contents inside were valuable. Sengoku raised his eyebrows and slowly opened the box. A golden devil fruit lay quietly inside. Sengoku stared and looked up at Garp in disbelief. Garp smiled and said, "This must be the fruit of those celestial dragons. I found one. You know, I'm not too fond of that group of people, so I won't hand over this fruit. But I don't want to become a landlubber either. You have to be interested. I'll give it to you." At the same time, on board the Roger pirates, Roger and others stood around a wooden box, looking at the red-haired baby in the box with bewildered expressions. The baby waved its little hands, but instead of crying, it actually giggled. Chapter 11. In the Kingdom of Sorbal, a place outside the law, in front of a slightly dilapidated church. The 4GJ people were teleported one after another. Ivan shook his dizzy head and muttered, "What happened? I feel so dizzy. Where is this place?" Shang looked up at the church in front of him, with a sad look on his face, and slowly said, "This is the country where I was born, the Kingdom of Sorbal." Ginny looked around curiously and asked, "So we escaped? There is a church here?" "Yes, this church belongs to my father, he is a pastor." Ivan and Ginny fell into silence. They had heard the bear talk about his experience and knew that the bear was remembering those painful memories. Well, GJ, who had been silent until now, suddenly made a painful sound. After hearing this, the Shang trio hurriedly looked towards GJ and saw that he was holding his forehead with one hand, his brows were furrowed, and beads of sweat appeared from his forehead. It looked like he was not in a good condition. It can be said that GGE's previous operations in the Valley of Gods made the three of them recognize GGE's big brother status from the bottom of their hearts. Even Ivan, the oldest, also shouted together, "Brother GJ, what's wrong with you?" The three of them ran to GGE's side. Ivan knelt down and put GGE's arm on his shoulders. Ginny gently stroked GGE's chest with her hand, and the bear stretched out his meat pad towards GJ. GJ saw the bear's intention. He wanted to use the power of the meatball fruit to try to expel the pain for himself. It has to be said that the bear and the meatball fruit are like a natural pair. The two are very compatible. In addition, GJ has taught them the ability of the meatball fruit in advance. Now the bears have figured out some of the meatball fruit practical usage. However, GJ raised his hand to stop the bear's behavior. Under the puzzled gaze of the bear, GJ breathed a sigh of relief and said in a weak voice, "You are not familiar with the power of the meatball fruit yet, so don't use it indiscriminately. And even if you use it, there will be no one else around, and the pain will eventually return to me." "No, I can." Shang patted his chest, which clearly meant that he wanted to help GJ bear the physical pain. However, GJ still refused. He stopped Shang's words because he didn't want Shang to do this, and at this time, his mind was in a mess, which could not be called pain. In his mind, chaotic memory fragments kept emerging, like a revolving door. He wanted to stop and watch carefully but couldn't stop. It all started after Garen said the 4 words, Fegalando, to him before leaving. GJ saw his body being placed on a cold test platform, and a man dressed as celestial dragons stared at him greedily. In an instant, anger, fear, confusion, and all kinds of negative emotions came over, and GJ felt a splitting headache. Crack! A silver arc of electricity emerged from GGE's body and electrocuted Ivan along his arm. The bear was also startled by GJ. He hurriedly pulled Ginny away, who was stunned. He also lifted up Ivan, who rolled his eyes, and used the power of the meatball fruit to get away. At this moment, Jijay suddenly raised his head, his originally dark pupils had turned blood red, and a tide of darkness spread out from under his feet. His eyes were empty and his voice was as cold as if he came from hell. Must kill him. Revenge. The darkness spread to the bear's feet and turned into a huge black mouth, about to swallow the bear. At this moment, Jiji's body softened and he fainted to the ground. The huge mouth of darkness froze suddenly, escaped into the darkness again, and returned to Jiji's body. Shang swallowed and raised his hand to wipe the cold sweat from his head. Just now he wanted to use his fruit power to avoid it, but he didn't know what happened. When the darkness approached him, he only felt that his connection with the power became extremely stagnant and difficult to mobilize. If Jijay hadn't fainted suddenly, he, Ivan and Ginny would have been completely swallowed by the darkness at this time. Putting Ginny and Ivan down, Shang slowly approached Jijay who was lying on the ground and found that Jijay had completely fainted. He picked up Jijay, and Ginny dragged Ivan on the ground and walked toward the church together. At night, in the haze, Jijay opened his eyes with difficulty and found that he was lying on a soft big bed. He slowly got up. Another wave of dizziness hit, and a voice full of hatred sounded in Jiji's mind. You are me, I am you, avenge me. Jijay didn't feel anything strange. He looked calm and murmured in a low voice, as if talking to himself. I know, we are one person, I will definitely take revenge. After saying that, Jijay felt his body light up, as if something had completely dissipated from his mind. He felt a sense of clarity that he had never experienced before, his perception became extremely sharp, and the layout of the entire church was clearly presented in his mind, including the scent of bear and Ginny in the church, as well as the where did the mummy come from? Looking at the large-headed mummy wrapped like a rice dumpling beside him, a look of surprise appeared on Jiji's face. The mummy shook its head twice and made a muffled sound. It's me Jijay, I'm Ivan, Ivan who was almost killed by you, hee hee, ha. Ah this. Only then did Jijay remember the electric discharge on his body at that time. He slapped his forehead, turned around, helped Ivan up, and said with an apologetic expression. Sorry Ivan, my brain was in chaos at that time and I didn't know what I was doing. No, it's okay. I even escaped from a place like the Valley of Gods. This little injury is nothing, he. It could be seen that Ivan was in a good mood and did not take the matter of being electrocuted to heart. But Jijay still felt a little guilty. He jumped off the bed and gently lifted Ivan and carried him on his back. Ivan's eyes widened in shock. He knew Jiji's physique well. Although it could not be said to be weak, it was not much better than Ginny, who was a girl. But now, Jijay could easily lift Ivan, who was much heavier than him, and carry him as if nothing had happened. Ivan felt like he had seen a ghost. Jijay also noticed this, but he didn't say anything more and just came to the living room like a gust of wind carrying Ivan on his back. The bear wearing an apron was walking out of the kitchen with a bowl of hot fish soup. Ginny was sitting on the dining table thinking about something with a knife in one hand and a fork in the other. Seeing Jijay appearing with Ivan on her back, Ginny was immediately stunned. The bear's hands trembled and the fish soup was about to fall to the ground. Buzz. A force of gravity appeared, and the bowl was controlled by Jijay. He chuckled and said, Shang, your craftsmanship is very good. This bowl of fish soup is very fragrant. The bear came back to his senses, hurriedly stepped forward and took Ivan off Jijay, and found a chair for Ivan to sit down. The four of them sat around a dining table, tasting the fish cooked by the bear. This fish was their only dish tonight, but fortunately the fish was quite big. Jijay ate with gusto. This was the first time he had a hot meal since he time traveled. When they were in the Valley of the Gods, they didn't have the energy to catch fish, let alone light a fire to cook, so they could only pick up some wild fruits as rations. However, the three Shangs didn't move their chopsticks for a long time. The three of them just watched Jijay showing off the fish with big mouthfuls. After drinking a large bowl of thick fish soup, Jijay smacked his lips, looked up at the three of them, and praised. Why don't you eat it? It tastes really good, Shang asked tentatively. Brother Jijay, do you still remember what happened during the day? There was an electric current in your body. Is that also your devil fruit ability? Ginny nodded vigorously, stretched out her hands and gestured. Yes, yes, even the eyes have turned red. It's so scary. Ivan did not speak. He stared at a pair of big copper bell-like eyes, full of curiosity. Obviously he also wanted to know what happened to Gigi. Gigi was not prepared to hide anything from these three people and whispered. That's because I remembered something. You should have heard what the man said to me when we were about to leave. At that time, the most conscious person besides Gigi was the bear. The bear said, "Remember, that person said your surname was Fegalando. Does this surname have any significance? Of course, that last name reminds me of a lot of things." Speaking of this, Gigi suddenly paused. He looked directly into the bear's eyes and slowly said, "Bear, if I were a celestial dragon, would you hate me?" Nani. X2. As soon as these words came out, Ginny and Ivan jumped up from their chairs and looked at Gigi in disbelief. Compared to the two people's reactions, Shang was much calmer. He lowered his head and said nothing. No one knew what he was thinking. Gigi didn't speak, just looked at the bear quietly. The church hall was eerily quiet, and Ginny finally couldn't bear it any longer. She forced a smile on her face and started laughing. "Are you kidding? Brother Gigi, how can you be a celestial dragon? We just escaped from the Valley of the Gods together." Ginny was unwilling to accept this reality from the bottom of her heart, but looking at Gigi's serious look, she knew that this matter was most likely true. Gigi looked at Ginny and said softly, "How could I joke about such a thing? I am indeed a celestial dragon. Otherwise, why would Garen, the leader of the Knights of God, rescue a slave from Charlotte Linlin? This Galen is yours. It's my uncle." Tears welled up in Ginny's eyes. She ran to Gigi and held Gigi's hands tightly, as if she was afraid of losing him. She murmured as if she was deceiving herself. "No, that's just a coincidence." "Yes, if that's the case, why would they allow you to live in the Valley of Gods?" Gigi raised his hand and stroked a dull pink hair on Ginny's head, and recounted his previous experiences in an extremely calm tone. Now that he has merged with the remaining soul of the original body, including the memory of the original body, he has experienced the pain all over again. He was born in Mariajoy, the Holy Land, to Saint Figalando Gulando, the eldest son of the Figalando family. Gulando's younger brother is Garen, who has become the leader of the Knights of God. The Knights of God are the ace force that protects the celestial dragons. The leader of each generation is inherited by a member of the Figalando family. Of course, such an important position will not be assigned to a certain family. The reason why it is always held by a member of the Figalando family is because the members of the Figalando family are not only a small number of awake factions, but also a member of the Figalando family. The important thing is that they are extremely talented. Their talents are not compared to those celestial dragons, but to the top experts outside. This can be seen from Garland. His performance in the Valley of the Gods was absolutely outstanding. He played against Charlotte Linlin, Newgate and finally Rox, and he showed no signs of decline. This generation of Figalando family gave birth to a pair of brothers, Garen and Gulando. As the elder brother, Grando was actually very talented, but compared to his younger brother Garen, he was weaker. He lost to Garen every time he competed, and in the end he missed the position of leader of the Knights of God. This has also become a permanent thorn in Gulando's heart. However, his talent seems to be more in his mind. In terms of scientific research, he can be said to be 10 miles ahead of Garen. There are too many talented races in this world, and Gulando also focused on this. In the end, he chose the Fur tribe and the Lunaria tribe. He wants to add these two genes to himself through experiments to become stronger. But he is more afraid of death, and he is an adult and his body is almost fully developed. Even if he uses genetic modification, the effect will be limited. Just when he was a little discouraged, his child, Gigi, was born. The Figalando family attaches great importance to the physical aptitude of their descendants and has special equipment to identify this. Gigi's statistics in all aspects are very strong, even stronger than the original Jeline. This made Gulen so overjoyed that this cold-blooded guy actually set his sights on his own son. Gigi's body is too perfect for Gulando, not to mention it's his bloodline. There are many ways to exchange bodies in this world, such as op fruit. As a member of the Celestial Dragons, Grando certainly knows this. Greedy, he is not even satisfied. He wants to apply his previous ideas and genetic modification experiments to Jie. He wants to get a body comparable to that of a god. As a result, Rando teamed up with Vegapunk to conduct inhumane genetic experiments on the young Jie. But no matter how strong Jiji's physical talent is, he is still a child after all. The long-term experiment directly caused his body to collapse and the experiment failed. Seeing Jie, who had died on the experimental table, Rando didn't even feel a trace of sadness in his heart, but only madness and violence. Waste. Gulando, who had become mentally perverted, actually hated Jie. He hated Jie for shattering his dream. So, he ordered his henchmen to throw Jiji's body into the slave ship and transported it to the Valley of the Gods with the ship. As Jie recounted this experience, there was no trace of fluctuation in his expression. Ginny and others were dumbfounded. They could not imagine that there could be such a father in this world. Even the words, "better than a beast," could be considered a compliment to him. Jie lowered his eyes, with a wisp of black smoke emitting from the corners of his eyes. It was obvious that his mood at this moment was not as calm as he appeared on the surface. I will definitely go back to Mariajoy and kill him with my own hands. Ginny's heart tightened. She held Jiji's hand subconsciously and asked eagerly, "Brother Jie, are you going to abandon us?" Ivan blinked his eyes crazily, expressing his inner eagerness in this way. Shang also raised his head and looked at Jie nervously. Jie was stunned for a moment, then shook his head and chuckled. "How could it be? I'm so weak now, and it's not the time to take Mariajoy back." Hearing this, Ginny and the three of them breathed a sigh of relief. As companions who had experienced the Valley of the Gods, escaped together, their feelings for each other were very deep. Moreover, Jiren's series of performances in the Valley of the Gods have already made him the backbone of the four. This feeling is even stronger for Ginny, the only girl among the four. So after confirming that Jie has no intention of taking Mariajoy back for the time being, Ginny can be said to be the happiest one. She couldn't help hugging Jie, rubbing Jiji's face hard, and shouted, "That's great, brother Jie. We will always be together. Never separate." Ivan squeezed the bandaged hand with difficulty, and just when he was about to speak, Shang took the lead and said, "Brother Jie, you gave me this strength. I will definitely work hard and never hold anyone back." A bright smile broke out on Jiji's face, but against the darkness surrounding the corners of his eyes, his smile had a hint of evil charm. "Bear, don't you care that I'm a celestial dragon's?" The bear shook his head and said softly, "No, Jie is still Jie. He is my big brother forever." Ginny turned her head and asked with a puzzled look on her face, "Shang's eye, then why were you lowering your head just now? You looked very worried." "Yes, I'm sorry. Actually, I knew when Galen mentioned Fegalando. I heard about this family when I was a slave. But I don't want to ruin our relationship because of this. I thought as long as you pretend not to know, you can continue to live together." Unexpectedly, brother Jie proposed it himself. As he said this, Shang scratched his head, a slightly honest action that seemed so simple and sincere to Jie. Gently pushing Ginny away from his arms, Jie looked around the three of them. A group of darkness loomed behind him. "Don't just blame me. You have all been persecuted by the celestial dragons. I will avenge you all. Ginny is a girl after all. To her, it is good that everyone can live well." So after hearing Jiji's words, she couldn't help but worry about gains and losses. "But brother Jie, are the celestial dragons really something we can resist?" Jie smiled slightly, raised his right hand that turned into darkness, and whispered, "Of course, otherwise wouldn't I have let down this dark fruit." As soon as he finished speaking, endless darkness surged out of Jie, enveloping the entire church like a black curtain, leaving no trace of light. Ginny was frightened by this scene and clutched Jiji's clothes tightly with both hands. Fortunately, the darkness did not last long. Soon, the darkness faded, and a clean and tidy hall appeared in the sight of Ginny and the three of them. This is. Looking at the spotless environment around her, Ginny covered her mouth in surprise, with a look of amazement on her face. Shang, who is also an ability user, was even more surprised. He was surprised that Jie could control Devil Fruit's abilities so well. He had already seen the power of dark fruit. That terrifying dark maw almost swallowed the three of them together. The bear still couldn't help but break into a cold sweat when he thought about it. He could feel the ultimate destructive power contained in that darkness, the power that could turn everything into powder. But Jie had just released such a large-scale dark power, but he was able to avoid the furnishings in the hall and the three bears. He just absorbed the dust and garbage. This meticulous control made the bears feel ashamed. If it were him, he would probably make a huge ball of flesh and wrap it around the church, and then clean it. But not to mention that with his current ability, it is difficult enough to create a meatball that can wrap around the church, let alone control the ability to bounce away the garbage in the church. If he really uses it, he may not blow the entire church away, which makes Shang respect Jie even more. The reason why Ji's control of dark fruit has improved so much is because he has now completely integrated with his original body, and his soul strength is far beyond that of ordinary people. Because of this, he, who was already extremely talented, naturally awakened observation haki. Ginny didn't think about it as much as the bear. This magical sight made her face turn red with excitement and she clapped her hands vigorously. Gouda! Ivan swallowed a mouthful of saliva, with envy in his eyes. Among the 2.5 boys present, he was the only one who did not get a devil fruit, so after seeing the abilities of Jie and Shang, he also hoped that he could also get a devil fruit of his own. But he didn't feel jealous at all. In his opinion, Jie and Shang were obviously more suitable for the 2 devil fruits than him. Ivan's performance was noticed by Jie. He was good at observing words and emotions and could easily see what Ivan was thinking at the moment. He immediately smiled and said, "Ivan, don't worry, the devil fruit that suits you hasn't appeared yet. Believe me, that devil fruit is destined to be yours." Ivan immediately danced with excitement. He was very convinced of Ji's words and asked immediately after hearing the words, "What's the name of that fruit?" Jie shook his finger and said mysteriously, "I won't tell you this yet, you just need to know that it can perfectly satisfy your little hobby." These words made Ivan even more itchy, and he kept pestering Jie with questions, but no matter how much he begged his grandfather to sue his grandmother, Jie would not say a word, which made him go crazy for a while. Finally, Jie couldn't stand being tortured by Ivan anymore. A plume of black smoke came out from his finger and he lightly stroked Ivan's big mouth. A darkness covered Ivan's mouth, and the right suction force made him pout hard. "Aha, I haven't eaten yet." 6 years later, in the church of Solbay Kingdom, Shang, who was over 5 meters tall, sat in the center of the church like a hill. In front of him were old men and women lining up waiting to be healed of their injuries. With the power of the meatball fruit, Shang has become a well-known priest in the Solbek Kingdom, and is deeply loved by these old people who have no money for medical treatment. A young man and woman were sitting on a bench in the church. The man lowered his head and carefully read a Bible with a black cover. The woman held her chin in one hand and stared at the man who was reading the book seriously. The two of them are Jie and Ginny 6 years later. Nowadays, Ginny has grown into a slim figure. She has short pink hair, wearing a white vest on the upper body and dark denim shorts on the lower body. The simple combination makes her look so youthful and beautiful. At this moment, she was flashing her big lavender eyes and pouting, saying, "Brother Jie, is this book so fascinating to you? You don't even look at me. Is it because I'm not good looking?" Jie looked away, reached out and gently rubbed Ginny's head, and said, "When did our beautiful Ginny become so unsure of herself? The pile of love letters sent to the church during this period is almost as high as a bear. HMPH, who cares about those people? They are like a swarm of flies, they are annoying to death." Just as he was talking, the bear over there finished his work for the day. He got up and sent the old people out of the church, leaving a huge red and transparent meatball on the spot. Seeing this, Jie closed the book in his hand and slowly stood up from the chair. Ginny also stood up, looking at Jie standing tall and tall, a gleam of light flashed in her eyes. Jie has just turned 15 this year, but her height has reached 1.9 meters, which is several heads taller than Ginny, who is several years older than her. He wears a white high-collared long coat with a black cross pattern printed on the chest, which is exactly the opposite color of the bear's clothes during the Shichibukai period. He has messy black hair, a white face with sharp edges, and his pupils are as dark as night, as deep as a pair of black holes. Looking at the transparent flesh ball formed by pain and fatigue, Gigi said softly, "It's time for me, the priest, to get to work." As he tapped the Bible with his fingers, the black cover began to squirm as if it was alive, forming a small black tornado that surged out and landed in front of the meat ball. When the darkness dissipated, what remained was an ugly middle-aged man wearing a crown. His originally gorgeous clothes were full of holes, and he looked very miserable. Seeing the man slumped on the ground, Ginny exclaimed, "King Beckley." The bear trotted back after hearing the noise, and was confused when he saw Beckley. Since the pain and fatigue caused by the bear's ability cannot dissipate naturally, Gigi has been going out to catch some scum back over the years and let them bear the pain. Gigi likes to travel at night. Coupled with his dark fruit ability, the villains call him the Dark God tier official. Shang and Ginny have become accustomed to this. After spending so many years together with Gigi, they are no longer the kind of good people who show kindness to everyone. But they didn't expect that Gigi would capture the king of this country this time. Gigi walked to stand next to Beckley, leaned down, put his hand on Beckley's back, and whispered in his ear, "Okay, now put your hand into this meatball. Do you want me to help you?" Gigi's voice sounded like a devil's whisper to Beckley's ears. His body trembled like chaff, his lower body felt hot, and a stream of heat surged out, causing him to urinate directly. The strong smell filled the air. Gigi frowned and looked unhappy. "You are such a disgrace to a king." Beckley suppressed the fear in his heart and said with a trembling voice, "You can't do this to me. I am the king of a country that has joined the world government. Do you want to attract Marine?" After hearing this, Gigi just smiled and replied, "Yeah, first just want Marine to come over. Speaking of which, they have to bow when they see me." "Nani, what nonsense are you talking about? Stop screaming. I specifically chose Monday. There are a lot of people here today. This meatball is much bigger than usual. It's enough for you to enjoy." After saying that, before Beckley could speak, Gigi pushed him into the meatball floating in the air with a slight force on his hand. "Ah!" The pig-like screams echoed in the church hall, and the sound lasted for a long time until it gradually stopped. Plop! Beckley, who had already rolled his eyes, fell to his knees and ended up in a pool of blood mixed with his urine. "Hey, can't you bear it after just a short while? It's been a real advantage for you to be the king comfortably for a few years." Gigi shook his head, and with a wave of his hand, a darkness surged out, submerging Bloodline and Beckley before dissipating into the air. Ginny approached Gigi, waved away the smell that was still in the air with her hands, and asked, "Brother Gigi, why did you catch this guy?" Gigi smiled slightly and said, "Didn't I just tell you to ask Marine to come over?" "Huh, but wouldn't Marine be on his side?" "Ha ha, have you forgotten my last name? Do you think Marine dares to take action against me? What does Brother Gigi mean? Of course first want Marine to hold a grand welcome ceremony for me." Gigi's eyes narrowed slightly, and wisps of black smoke rose from his dark hands. He's going into Marine. After 6 years, he felt that his strength had reached a bottleneck. If he wanted to continue to improve, he had to go through combat and hockey's training. The Sorbet Kingdom is too weak to satisfy his fighting intensity. Nowadays, the sea is turbulent. Roger pirates, Whitebeard pirates and other forces have risen one after another. This is the best time for him to train himself. There is also hockey's training. Counting the time, it is just the time when Zephyr is transferred to instructor and takes care of the first class of students. Zephyr's teaching level is definitely not bad. Different from the wild approach of Teacher Kaido, Zephyr is a serious academic. The 3 Logias behind him, Admiral, were all his students, and all 3 of them were top-notch in terms of physical skills and physical abilities. Gigi believes that with his talent and Zephyr's guidance, his strength will soon make a qualitative leap. As for his identity, Gigi has already considered this. He is not afraid of not being able to get into Marine or being targeted by Gulando because of his overly public behavior. He took out an envelope from his arms, with a line of small gilded words printed on it. Saint Fegolando Galen. Garen took his nephew surprisingly seriously. As an elite member of the Celestial Dragons, he could be said to have great hands and eyes, and he quickly found Gigi's location. For 6 years, the two never lost contact. When Jie was about to overthrow the king, Jeline only wrote one sentence in the letter sent to Jie. Choose your own path, remember, behind you is the Figolando family. Needless to say, Garen's status in the family goes without saying. Even the eldest son Gulando cannot influence his will. He had criticized Gurindo's actions back then, but he didn't expect that Gurindo's experiment would be so dangerous, which directly led to Gigi's death. When he learned the news, it was already too late. Now that he had the opportunity to make amends, he would not miss it. In fact, Jeline wanted Jie to return to the family at first, but Jie refused. The Figolando family respects strength. Jie must become stronger. He must suppress the entire family with absolute strength, and then personally kill his father, who is worse than a beast. In the evening, Ivan, who had been crazy outside all day, returned to the church. When he came back, he saw Jie and 3 people sitting on the sofa. Sensing something was wrong in the atmosphere, Ivan couldn't help but shrink his head and said weakly, "Are everyone waiting for me? What happened?" Ginny jumped off the sofa, put one hand on her waist, pointed at Ivan with the other, and said angrily, "Brother Ivan, where did you go wandering again? You came back so late." Ivan stared at his big eyes and said while gesticulating, "Don't you know? There's chaos outside now. The king is lost." However, even after he told such explosive news, the expressions of Jie and the others did not waver at all. Ginny even sighed and looked at him helplessly. Jie shook the Bible in his hand and said with a smile, "I have sent him back to the arms of God." Nani. Jie never avoided them when using his abilities, so Ivan knew what was going on as soon as he heard it. He swallowed and made a gesture of wiping his neck. "So the king is attracted by you?" "Yes." After a short silence, Ivan suddenly raised his hands and spun around in circles. "I've long disliked that king. As expected of you, Jie-chan. Ha ha." He turned all the way in front of Jie, leaned back, and gave Jie a lethal wink. A big, well, appeared on Ginny's head, and she kicked Ivan on the butt, causing him to spin and roll out. Jie always maintained a polite smile on his face, but a drop of cold sweat still broke out on his forehead. He habitually turned 2 pages of the Bible in his hand. By the way, in addition to practicing these years, Jie would spend his free time reading books stored in the church to hone his temperament. 6 years ago, he awakened the power belonging to the fur tribe in his body, but it also caused him to lose control of his emotions and almost accidentally hurt the bears and others. In fact, the genes of a fur race alone are not like this. The main reason is that there are other genes in Gigi's body. These powerful race genes are intertwined in his body, and once activated, it is easy for him to enter a violent state and even fight against us. No distinction. That's why he reads books, to keep his emotions in a peaceful state for a long time so as to better control his own power. Snapped. After closing the Bible, Jie looked solemn and said in a deep voice, "The news of the king's disappearance has spread. The world government will take action soon. Soon, they will send Marine to investigate." The bear rubbed the flesh pads between his palms and said, "Brother, then we are going to war with Marine, right?" Ginny took out a gold-plated pistol from her proud bust. It was a birthday gift that Jie sneaked into the palace to get back for her on her birthday. It can be said that she couldn't put it down. She carried it with her almost every time except when taking a bath. And Ginny didn't just use this gun as a decoration. Because of her appearance and figure, some nobles once had an eye on her, and some even resorted to violence. The group clearly mistook Ginny for a vase, but they were wrong. While girls of the same age were still acting coquettishly with their parents, Ginny had already walked back and forth from the Valley of the Gods. She has seen the dark side of the world very early, and because she has been with Jie for a long time, she knows the importance of strength. So over the years, she has never failed to train, and now she is an out-and-out Shinso player. Not to mention Ivan, his shemale boxing technique has already begun to take shape. Looking at the 3 people who were eager to try, Jie couldn't help laughing and said, "Don't be so nervous. I'm not asking you to fight to the death with Marine. I just want to ask, do you want to join Marine with me?" As soon as these words came out, the 3 of them were stunned. After a while, Ginny said with a worried look, "I don't care. I will go wherever Brother Gj goes, but, we were all slaves. If we are found out, will we? Gj stretched out his finger and tapped Guinea's forehead and said. Why do you always forget that I am also a celestial dragon's? As long as I am here, no one dares to do anything to you. Ginny nodded obediently. She held Gge's hand and said seriously. Brother Gj, I will follow you. I said 6 years ago that we should never separate. Shang also raised his hand, indicating that he would follow Gj. Only Ivan lowered his head and did not express his position. Gj did not urge him and just looked at him quietly. Ginny couldn't help it anymore. She grabbed Ivan's ears and asked loudly. Brother Ivan, what are you thinking about? Don't you want to go with me? Ivan was silent for a moment, then slowly raised his head, with a rare serious expression on his face. I'm sorry, I think I'm really not suitable to be a marine. I like freedom and the sea. Guinea's expression changed, and she wanted to say something more but was interrupted by Gj raising her hand. Gj doesn't have any negative emotions about Ivan's choice. Everyone has their own ambitions, and he will not force it. And he had already mentally expected this result. Although he felt a little regretful, he still respected Ivan's choice. He will not be estranged from Ivan because of this. He always remembers the days when they escaped together in the Valley of Gods, as well as every detail of the past 6 years. Looking at Ivan with a guilty look on his face, Gj showed a sincere smile. He patted Ivan on the shoulder and whispered. It doesn't matter, we will always be friends, and one day we will meet again on the sea. In the next few days, unlike the chaotic Solb country outside, the church where Gj lived continued to live its previous days as if nothing had happened. The only difference is that Ivan, who had to go out every day to go crazy, has calmed down. He stays in the church every day and occasionally helps Shang receive the old people who come for treatment. No one mentioned what happened that night, and the relationship between the few of them remained the same. Until this day, a marine warship arrived at the port. A large number of marine soldiers walked quickly from the warship, as well as a marine officer with the rank of rear admiral. The nobles and ministers of Solbay Kingdom have been waiting here for a long time, and they immediately surrounded the marine rear admiral when they saw him. A minister approached the marine rear admiral diligently and said, You should be Bab's rear admiral of this headquarters, we have been waiting for you. The rear admiral named Babs nodded and gave a military salute. Then he did not look at the minister again, but turned his eyes in the direction of the warship. Following Bubbles' gaze, he saw a man with a slicked back hair and a black and gray striped coat, followed by 2 men in suits, slowly walking down the warship with arrogant steps. The marine soldiers on both sides had awkward looks on their faces and lowered their heads, obviously not wanting to see this guy. A look of disgust flashed across Bab's rear admiral's eyes, but he quickly restrained himself. He leaned forward slightly and said in a respectful tone, Mr. Spandane, we have arrived at the kingdom of Sorby. Spandane ignored Babs. He glanced sideways at the man in a suit next to him. The man in the suit immediately understood and skillfully took out a cigar and handed it to Spandane's mouth, then took out a lighter and lit it. Taking a deep puff of his cigar, Spandane glanced contemptuously at the ministers in front of him, then at the town not far away, and puffed out a large puff of smoke. This is the country of Solbay. Yep, this can also be called a country. No wonder there is so little gold in the sky every year, hee tooey. A mouthful of thick phlegm wiped the collar of a nobleman and fell to the ground. However, this nobleman who was used to showing off his power did not even dare to fart. These ministers and nobles are not stupid. From Spandane's arrogant behavior and what he said just now, they vaguely know Spandane's identity. He is a member of the world government. The minister who had been courting Bab's rear admiral just now immediately changed his target, bent his body like a shrimp and leaned in front of Spandane, and asked in a flattering tone. Forgive me for being clumsy, my lord, who are you? Spandane still had that arrogant look with his nostrils turned upward. The man in a suit next to him stopped in front of Spandane and scolded. What are you doing so close to me? You don't deserve to know the identity of the master, just stay here. The minister was startled, quickly stepped back, and said in panic. I'm really sorry for offending you, sir. Please don't be angry. Spandane waved his hand impatiently and said, Okay, I heard that your king is gone. Just let Babs handle the bigger things. I am here with an important mission. The minister bowed several times again. Seeing how pitiful he was, Babs said, "Tell me about the current situation. Do you have any clues about King Beckley?" Although he is a minister of a country, whether it is Rear Admiral Babs from the headquarters or Spangdien from the world government, each of them is a big shot that he cannot afford to offend. He immediately replied, "His Majesty the King was fine during the day, but he suddenly disappeared one night. We speculate that this matter is probably related to Ji. This person is not old, but he has a strange ability. The most important thing is that he has no law and is an extremely dangerous person." After hearing the minister's description, Babs nodded slightly and thought, "Strange ability. Is it demon fruit power? No wonder. Devil fruit is a rare item, especially in such a remote and small country. A slightly stronger ability user is not something ordinary people can deal with." Babs wanted to ask about Ji again, but Spangdien's expression suddenly changed and the cigar in his mouth fell to the ground. He jumped over the two men in suits, grabbed the minister by the collar, and shouted with foam at the mouth, "Who did you just say? Say it again." The minister, who had his face sprayed with saliva, replied honestly, Ji. King Beckley should have been captured by him." Snapped. A loud slap sounded, and in full view of everyone, the minister was slapped hard by Spangdien and fell to the ground. If he hadn't been blocked by Babs's leg, he wouldn't have rolled further. After reacting, Babs frowned and said with an unhappy expression, "Mr. Spangdien, although you are an official of the world government, is this behavior a bit excessive? After all, Sorby country is also one of the participating countries. You can't treat a minister like this without reason, right?" Spangdien took a few deep breaths. He himself had little fighting ability, which was due to the slap in the face just now. After his breathing had calmed down a little, he pointed at the shivering minister lying at Babs's feet and cursed, "I don't care what kind of virtue you have. Can you call that adult by his first name? All just." As he said that, Spangdien took out a pistol and pointed it at the minister and was about to shoot. A man in a suit on the side quickly stopped him. "Lord Spangdien, don't kill him yet, we have to find out where that lord is from his mouth." The words had an effect. The furious Spangdien put down his pistol and directed two men in suits to drag the minister over like a dead dog. Babs did not stand up to speak for the minister this time. He fell into silence. This time it seemed that the matter was not as simple as he thought. Not long ago, he received a mission from Sengoku Admiral to investigate the disappearance of the king, but when he was about to set off, Spangdien suddenly arrived and asked to go to the kingdom of Solb together. Babs wanted to inform Sengoku first, but Spangdien produced a document signed by the world government and did not give him a chance to inform him at all. With this document, even if Babs was unhappy, he had no choice but to let Spangdien board the ship. Spangdien didn't reveal his purpose to him, and he didn't bother to ask. He just thought that everyone was busy with their own things when they arrived in Sorby country. But now, it seems that the two people's tasks are intertwined. The key point is the young man mentioned by the minister, Ji. Inside the church, Ji seemed to feel something. He closed the Bible in his hand, turned his face sideways, smiled and said to Ginny beside him, "Get ready, the people coming to pick us up are here." Ginny, who was looking at Ji in a daze, turned red. She pulled the white vest on her body in a panic, sat up straight and asked, What's the matter? Brother Ji, what kind of guest?" As soon as he finished speaking, a sound of footsteps came from the door of the church. Spangdien suddenly stopped in front of the church door. He stretched out his hand to stop Babs and the others behind him, and whispered, "Okay, don't go in, don't disturb that adult." Babs became more and more curious and couldn't help but ask, "Mr. Spangdien, are you sure this Ji is the person you were looking for? I don't mean anything else, but this person is probably demon fruit power, and the disappearance of King Beckley is also related to him. I'm worried you." Spangdien glared at him and continued to lower his voice and said, "I told you not to call this gentleman by his first name. Let me tell you, if I offend this man, as long as he says a word, let alone you, even I will disappear from this world." Spangdien's impression on Babs has always been one of lawlessness and superiority. But now that he was so frightened by just a name, it was hard for Babs to imagine what kind of background this young man named GJ had and how he could stay in the small country of Sorby. He stopped asking questions and directly ordered Marine behind him to wait where he was. Spangdien sprayed some saliva on his hands, wiped his hair, then straightened his clothes, put on a flattering expression, straightened his body and walked into the church alone. In the church hall, GJ and Ginny were sitting on a bench. When Spangdien came in, he saw their backs. He didn't dare to say anything, but walked gently to the side of the bench and asked with a smile on his face. "Hello, is Master GJ here?" GJ stood up from the bench. His height of 1.9 meters made Spangdien feel a sense of oppression. His calm expression already made him vaguely guess that the person in front of him was the person he was looking for this time. "I am GJ. You must have been sent by Uncle Galen, right? Your name is Spangdien." When he heard the name, Uncle Galen, Spangdien was so excited that he immediately bent down even lower. He looked like he was about to kowtow on the spot. Yes, the villain is Spangdien, Lord GJ, please forgive me for the offense just now. It is really a great honor for me to meet you." This is how Spangdien was able to climb to his current position. He knows very well who the master of this world is. Some time ago he received a message from Mariajoy, and he would never forget the majestic voice that came from the phone bug. It came from Saint Figolando Garin. That's the Figolando family, celestial dragons in celestial dragons. And Galen Sheng has become the head of the family. Just hearing this name makes him feel suffocated. When Galen gave him the task of picking up GJ, he was almost crazy with excitement. For him, this was an opportunity that was hard to come by even if there was smoke in the ancestral grave. As long as he has a little relationship with the Figolando family, his status can reach a new level. What's more, the person he was asked to pick up was Galen Sheng's nephew. Although he had never met GJ before, GGE's status in his heart was now closer than that of his biological father. Shang and Ivan both came out of the room when they heard the noise. When they saw Spangdien, they roughly guessed what was going on. "People from the world government are here." A sad look appeared on Ivan's face, and he knew that this meant that it was time for him and GJ to part ways. Spangdien lowered his head, not daring to look at GJ. His extremely humble attitude made Ginny click her tongue. This was also the first time that Ginny intuitively realized the dignity of GGE's status. A senior official of the world government would behave so badly in front of GJ. GJ glanced in the direction of the door and said, "There are a lot of people outside, why didn't you come in together?" "Sir GJ, Lord Galen has told you that you don't want too many people to know your identity, so I didn't let them in." GJ nodded and praised. "You did a great job." After receiving GGE's praise, Spangdien felt a sense of relief all over his body, and immediately patted his chest and said, "Don't worry, Lord GJ. Lord Galen has told you that if you have any inconvenience in the future, you can leave it to me. I will definitely handle it for you. You are my master, I am you dog." These words are really not something that ordinary people can say, and Ginny on the side was dumbfounded. Even GGE's mouth twitched, he coughed twice and said, "Okay, now let the people outside come in." "Yes, Master G. Geshung." "Wait, don't put Saint after my name in front of outsiders, especially Marine." The villain understands. Now Spangdien, as he said, has completely transformed into a loyal dog, and ran outside to call for help. After he left, Ginny couldn't help but sigh. He is really a weirdo. GJ smiled and said, "You will see more people like this in the future, so get used to it in advance." After a while, Spangdien walked in with Babs and other Marines and nobles. These people looked at GJ with a hint of awe. It was obvious that Spangdien had just told them something outside. Bubbles looked at GJ standing in the center of the church, feeling surprised. What surprised him was that GJ was younger than he thought, and it was GJ that made him feel a little bit of danger. This shows that the strength of the person in front of him is no longer inferior to him, or even stronger than him. GJ also saw the military rank on Babs's shoulder and walked towards Babs. Looking at GJ walking towards him step by step, Babs's heart tightened and his body tensed up subconsciously. However, when GJ came to him and said something, he was immediately confused. "Hello, my name is GJ. My friends and I want to join Marine. Seeing that Babs was still silent, Spangdien on the side stamped his feet and secretly cursed the idiot. He pushed Babs hard, but he was so weak that he almost fell down. This made him even more angry and said in a bad tone. Babu's Rear Admiral, Mr. G.J., is talking to you, can you be polite? Under Spangdien's urging, Babs had no choice but to say, sorry, I can't make the decision on this request. If you want to enter the headquarters, you must first report to the recruitment office. Now Zephyr Admiral has been transformed into an instructor, and he is responsible for the recruitment and training of recruits. Hearing Zephyr's name, Spangdien's arrogance also turned off. He knew that Zephyr, in his own words, was very slutty, a person who was very difficult to talk to and didn't know how to adapt at all. But Zephyr is indeed strong enough. After all, he is a person who has served as Marine Admiral. Spangdien is still very self-aware. He knows that in front of Bubbles, the Marine Rear Admiral, he dares to show off his power under the guise of world government, but it is not necessarily the case with Zephyr. He secretly glanced at GJ and found that GJ didn't show any dissatisfaction on his face, and even had a smile on his face. According to Spangdien, there are only two possibilities for this performance. One is that GJ is extremely well educated and can perfectly control his emotions even if he hits a snag with Babs. The other is that GJ doesn't take Babs seriously at all. He is full of confidence in his family's power. Although GJ gave him a very different feeling from other celestial dragons, he still preferred the second possibility. Because members of the Fegalando family can do whatever they want. Thinking of the Fegalando family, Spangdien's fear of Zephyr instantly disappeared. Yes, isn't Zephyr just a Marine Admiral? In front of the Fegalando family, let alone a Marine Admiral, what about the current Marine Marshal Kong? Judging from St. Jalen's attitude towards GJ, Spangdien also knew that this was a master who could walk sideways in Mariajoy. The more Spangdien thought about it, the straighter his back became. He raised his eyebrows, pointed at Babs and said, Mr. GJ wants to go to Marine. It's an honor for you Marines. Don't be shameless. You just said Zephyr, right? Come on, give me the phone bug. I'll tell him in person. I want to see the face of world government. To give or not to give. Bubbles didn't expect that Spangdien would dare to be so arrogant after hearing Zephyr's name, but when the words came out, he was so worried that he really wanted to reach out and touch the phone bug from his arms. GJ suddenly reached out and held down his arm. It's not necessary. You still have to go through the process. You just need to take me and my friends to the headquarters. As he spoke, he nodded to Spangdien, which made Spangdien, who was a little uneasy, instantly moved to tears. This was a step down for Babs, and he was not that ignorant. He immediately agreed and said that he would send GJ and others safely to naval headquarters. The bear looked back at the cross hanging on the central wall of the church, with a worried look in his eyes. GJ saw through what he meant. He called Spangdien to his side and told him something in a low voice. Spangdien nodded like garlic. After finishing the matter, GJ patted Ivan's shoulder hard, then called Shang and Ginny, and followed Babs to leave the church where he had lived for 6 years. Ivan remained silent for a while, then suddenly bolted and rushed out of the church. He shouted at the disappearing figures of GJ and others. GJ, thank you. And Big Bear and Ginny Chan. You must take care. Hearing Ivan's shouts behind him, GJ did not look back, but just raised a smile at the corner of his mouth. He comforted Ginny who was crying beside him, turned to the bear and said, Shang, are you worried about those old people? Shang was stunned for a moment, and thought to himself that he was indeed the eldest brother of GJ, he could always see through what he was thinking. Yes, they are all old and cannot do heavy work. If there is any problem with their health, they will not have the money to see a doctor. GJ stood still, stared into the bear's eyes, and said earnestly, Shang, there are many people like those old people in the world. You can't take care of them all. Their suffering is not caused by you, and you don't need to feel guilty about it. Shang nodded silently. He understood what GJ said, but he had been with those old people for a long time. If he left them behind like this, he would still feel reluctant to let go. GJ put away her serious expression and said with a smile, Don't worry, Shang, I have my own arrangements for those old people. Look, didn't Spangdien come with you? In the church at this time, the ministers and nobles of the Saul kingdom stood in front of Spangdine with their heads hanging down like a group of primary school students. Spangdine can be said to have changed his face in Sichuan opera. Compared with the person he was in front of Ji before, he is a completely different person. He held a cigar in his mouth, paced back and forth in front of the ministers, opened his mouth and said, "You guys are such rubbish. You can't even manage such a small country well. There are so many old people who don't even have money for medical treatment." The two men in suits behind him looked at each other in confusion. Based on their understanding of Spangdine, this was a scumbag who only wanted to get promoted and get rich. When did he start caring about people's livelihood? A minister said weakly, "Lord Spangdine, actually we don't want this. This is all done by the original King Beckley. He has been raising taxes for. That's enough. I don't want to listen to your nonsense anymore. Since that Beckley is incompetent, let's find another king." Okay. Under the incredulous gazes of all the ministers, Spangdine puffed out another puff of smoke and said lightly, "That's it. I heard that the previous king was named Bulldog. He was very good. Let him take the throne again. However, the change of the king of the franchise country needs to be reported to Mariajoy." "I don't know, Mr. Spangdine. HMPH. Do you still need to say this? Am I the kind of person who doesn't know the rules?" After saying this, everyone present except Spangdine himself felt a burst of curse in their hearts, but no one dared to fart. Spangdine also knew that what he said was indeed a bit unconvincing. In fact, he did not have the power. But since he dares to make such a decision, he naturally has his confidence, and his confidence comes from Ji. Because these were all what Ji had just told him, thinking of Ji, a look of fanaticism appeared on Spandine's face. He threw away his cigar and wiped his ash-stained fingers on a minister's clothes. "Let me tell you, these are Lord Ji's wishes. He is God, and his words are the edict. Just follow them obediently, and you don't need to worry about the rest." After speaking, Spangdine waved his hand and walked away under the escort of two men in suits. Naval Headquarters, Marineford, Jewelry Ginny, from South Blue, 19 years old, good at shooting. Bartholomew Big Bear, born in South Blue, 16 years old, user of Paramecia Flash Ball Fruit. Darkside Ji, born in South Blue, 15 years old, a user with Logia Dark Fruit ability. At the Marine Recruitment Department, the interviewer stared at Ji and the three people in front of him in stunned silence, and then looked down at the three resumes placed on the table. His eyes finally stopped at the line of small words on Ji's resume, Logia Dark Fruit. Babs Rear Admiral stood aside, also looking shocked. He had already guessed that Ji had demon fruit power, but he really didn't expect that Ji's devil fruit would be Logia. He couldn't understand the strength of the Logia devil fruit, because now there are two such Logia monsters among the new recruits brought by Zephyr Instructor. Lava Fruit and Shining Fruit. Babs has seen these two ability users take action. To sum it up in one sentence, that is action and natural disaster. Fortunately, the current instructor is the former Zephyr Admiral. An ordinary general would not even be able to suppress these two Logia ability users. The generals in this department basically have armament hockey, which can deal with Logia's elementalization, but the lethality of the two elements of magma and flash is really terrifying. To this day, Babs still remembers seeing with his own eyes a Marine Rear Admiral who was almost at the same level as him, being teased by the Shining Fruit ability user. Even with observation hockey, it was difficult to touch the hem of that ability user's clothes. As for the Lava Fruit ability user, needless to say, it's not that the Marine Rear Admiral can't touch it, but that he doesn't dare to touch it at all. The boiling magma is enough for the Marine Rear Admiral to drink a pot of if it touches it. The iron body they are so proud of is a complete joke in front of magma. Since then, Babs has known that there are definitely grades of devil fruit. At least in his eyes now, Logia devil fruit is noble. Moreover, Ji's Logia devil fruit is a dark element opposite to light. Just thinking about it, you know that this dark fruit is definitely a top quality Logia that is not weaker than those two fruits. Bubbles' body began to tremble with excitement. He actually brought back such a monster to Marine. No, genius. The interviewer also swallowed his saliva. He didn't know whether he was stunned or something, but he unexpectedly said to Ji, 15 years old. You are a bit young. This does not meet our recruitment requirements. As he spoke, he looked doubtfully at Gigi's height of almost 2 meters in front of him, and thought, is he really 15? Gigi was also stunned. Just as he was about to explain, Babs suddenly got violent and directly pressed the interviewer's head on the table. Aha, Babs, what are you doing? The interviewer struggled hard, and with a constipated smile on his face, Bubbles said to the Gigi trio with a smile. Great, I think these 3 talents are born to join Marine. In the surprised gazes of Gigi and the other 3 people, Babs's hands turned into afterimages, and he grabbed the seal on the table and stamped it 3 times. People who didn't know this showed that Gigi and the other 3 signed a contract to sell themselves. When the interviewer raised his head, Babs had already grabbed 3 resumes and said, you have passed. I will report to Sengoku Admiral later, and then the headquarters will arrange a place for you. You can rest for a few days, and then you can report to Marine School with these 3 resumes. Gigi glanced at the red seal on her resume and said, then let's go hang out first and come back here to wait for you later. Of course, but don't go too far. After all, you haven't officially joined the Marines yet. Okay. After Gigi and the other 3 left, Bubbles took the 3 resumes in his hands and looked at them carefully. He also kissed Gigi's one fiercely, making the interviewer next to him feel chilled. He rubbed his red forehead and said with dissatisfaction, hey Babs, you're going too far. Even if you ignore Gigi's age, have you investigated the backgrounds of the 3 of them? You only know that they are from South Blue. Bubbles glanced sideways at him and muttered, don't worry about it for now. This is Logia. Do you understand the value of Logia? Hey, here is a user with Paramesh's ability. Although Paramesh's 5-flowered fruit is 8-gate, maybe this is also a surprise. Quote. TCH. Look at your virtues. That girl named Ginny is not bad either. She looks heroic. I think few of the girls who came for interviews before had this feeling. That's all right. We at Marine want to welcome talents like this to join us. There's nothing wrong with what I'm doing. Looking at Babs, who was in a state of madness, the interviewer nodded helplessly and said feebly, okay, aren't you going to report to Sengoku Admiral? By the way, show him these 3 resumes. Hey, we didn't even check the background. We are still too hasty in doing this. Well, I will report this matter to Sengoku Admiral truthfully, and I believe Sengoku Admiral will definitely support my approach. Babs carefully stuffed Gigi's resume into his arms and strode away. On the way, Babs's excitement gradually calmed down, and he began to think seriously about this trip to Sorby country. Background investigation is indeed very important, especially for Gigi. With Spangdine as a backdrop, Gigi's background becomes even more mysterious. However, no matter how much he thought about it, he could not have imagined that Gigi would be a celestial dragon. The most he could guess was that Gigi was the illegitimate son of a senior executive in the world government, and was placed in Solbay country for some shady reasons. Growing up in such a remote country, when the time comes, he will make arrangements to pave the way for his child. He has not heard of this kind of operation. Pouring his lips, Bubbles felt that this little thing was nothing compared to Logia dark fruit. Thinking of this, Babs quickened his steps and soon arrived in front of Sengoku's office and knocked gently on the office door. Sengoku Admiral, I am Babs. Come in. In the office, Sengoku was holding a document that had just been sent from world government and muttered to himself. It's strange how the kingdom of Sorby suddenly changed its king, and he didn't even mention the missing King Beckley. Looking up and seeing Babs walking in, Sengoku waved and asked, Babus, you've just come back. Tell me what's going on in Solbay country. Have you found King Beckley? Babs told Sengoku everything about his trip to Sorbet country. After hearing this, Sengoku held his chin and thought for a moment, then said, has a small country like Solb attracted so much attention? I've heard of Spangdine. His status in the world government is not low, but he is not very likable. Babs nodded in agreement, and on the way to Sorbet country, God knows how many times he wanted to kick Spangdine into the sea. Sengoku picked up the document on the table and took one last look, then threw it to the white lamb beside him. The lamb squeaked and ate it, like a living paper shredder. After the lamb swallowed the paper with a grunt, Sengoku touched the lamb's head and said, forget it, Now that the world government has decided, the rest is not ours, Marine. Babs, do you have anything else to do? Babs nodded quickly and took out the 3 resumes from his arms with excitement on his face and placed them neatly on Sengoku's desk. Sengoku leaned back in his chair, glanced at the resume on the table, and asked doubtfully. Resume. Recruitment is Zephyr's responsibility, right? Why are you showing it to me? Sengoku Admiral, there are 2 demon fruit powers here alone, and one of them is Logia, dark fruit. Nani? Logia. Sengoku straightened up suddenly, leaned forward and stared at the 3 resumes on the table. Finally, he fixed his eyes on Gigi's one and murmured. Dark fruit. Is it the dark element opposite to Porosalino's sparkling fruit? Boris, you really brought me a surprise. Let me mention here again that the previous news spread by Ginny in the Valley of the Gods only specified the meatball fruit and the blue dragon fruit, and other fruits were not mentioned. The world government had no plans to let Marine participate in the Valley of the Gods, and the news about devil fruit has been kept under lock and key. So in addition to the Buddha fruit that Sengoku got from Garp, as well as the blue dragon and meatballs that were revealed, he didn't know what the remaining fruits were. Especially the dark fruit, which is a treasure stolen by the world government from Rock's lair. It is the most precious and powerful devil fruit they have prepared, and the confidentiality measures are also the strongest. And Jie didn't show much of dark fruit's abilities in the Valley of Gods, so Sengoku didn't think much about it. All he thinks about now is, Marine is really going to be developed this time. With Jie, Marine actually got 3 of Logia's devil fruits at once, light, darkness, and magma. Anyone with a bit of common sense knows that these 3 elements cannot be weak. When these 3 people grow up, how powerful Marine's power will be. Before he became marshal, Sengoku was still very passionate. He didn't have to put too much energy into dealing with world government. That was something that the current Marshal Kong should worry about. What he thinks most about is how to strengthen Marine and eliminate pirates. Looking at Gigi's photo on his resume, Sengoku's eyes became more and more fanatical. Babs had been paying attention to Sengoku's expression. Seeing Sengoku Admiral, who was the most stable in his mind, showing such a rude expression, Babs couldn't help but feel proud, but he looked embarrassed and said, Sengoku Admiral, there is no need to report to you about recruiting new recruits, but Jie is only 15 years old, which does not comply with the recruitment regulations. I am afraid that Zephyr Admiral will be unhappy when he sees it. Rules? What rules? Didn't you see that this Jie is 1.9 meters tall? Why should he care about age when he is so tall? Besides, this is dark fruit. Zephyr is not that pedantic. He understands the importance of this fruit. What does it mean to Marine? With Sengoku Admiral's words, I feel relieved, but there is another thing. Gigi's background is not simple. You haven't seen how humble the arrogant Spangdine is in front of him. Quote, it's not a big deal. Since Jie has the consciousness to join Marine, it means that he is a passionate young man who yearns for justice. Besides, how deep can his background be? Could he still be a celestial dragon's? Sengoku himself laughed when he said this. Celestial dragons signed up for Marine. Isn't that the most ridiculous thing in the world? Shaking his head slightly to get rid of this ridiculous idea in his mind, Sengoku took another look at Shang's resume. Paramesha meatball fruit. Sengoku was stunned for a moment, and finally remembered what happened to the Valley of Gods. He remembered that Charlotte Linlin was blocked by Saint Jeline, and the fruit was finally eaten by a tall child, and then the child disappeared with 3 other children. Sengoku frowned slightly and began to make calculations in his mind. Could this bear be the child from back then? Judging from his height, it's very possible. Was he once a slave of the celestial dragons? It's a bit troublesome. He had no doubt that Jie would be one of them. In his opinion, Jie was a person with a world government background. How could he be thrown into the Valley of Gods as prey? Sengoku pointed to the photo of the bear and asked, what is the relationship between this bear and Jie? The 3 of them are friends. According to my observation, they have a very good relationship. Shang and Ginny call Jie their big brother. Sengoku couldn't help but think of Crane, Garp and himself back then. With a look of nostalgia on his face, he nodded and said, I see, it's okay. You take them to the accommodation area to find a place to stay, and take them to Zephyr's place to report in 2 days. Yes. Oh, by the way, you have worked hard this time and brought back such a talented person. I will report your matter to Marshal Kong. Thank you, Sengoku Admiral. Babs excitedly saluted with a military salute, picked up Gigi's resume, turned around and left happily. After he left, Sengoku stood up from his chair and wandered back and forth in the office with his hands behind his back. Things would become very troublesome once the celestial dragons were involved. If it weren't for Jiji, Sengoku would not have sent the bear to Mariajoy after knowing the identity of the bear, but he would never have agreed to the bear joining Marine. There is no way, the temptation of dark fruit is too great for Marine, this is really no exaggeration. In Blue Star terms, a powerful Logia devil fruit is tantamount to a nuclear weapon. Sengoku didn't want Jiji, the future humanoid nuclear weapon, to have any grudge against Marine because of this. He comforted himself in his heart and said, anyway, Celestial Dragons already has enough slaves, and it's been so many years. If you just cover it up a little, they probably won't notice. Chapter 21. Marineford, Leisure Area. In the future of the Marine Admiral, Kizaru and Akainu were wandering aimlessly on a street. Both of them were dressed casually. Kizaru was wearing a yellow shirt, a white hooded hat, and a pair of brown sunglasses on his face. Akainu was wearing a red shirt. His exposed chest muscles were extremely strong, and the left chest was covered with tattoos of rose petals. He wore a white marine hat with a low brim and a stern expression on his face, giving him the air of a gangster brother. Compared to Akainu, Kizaru looks like a street kid. Kizaru was peeling the banana in his hand. He glanced at the dull Akainu next to him and said, Sakazuki, today is a rare day off, can't you be happy? Akainu slightly adjusted the brim of the hat that almost covered his eyes, and said in a low voice, I still have a few sets of training to do today. I'll eat quickly later. I'll continue training when I get back. Kizaru shrugged, finished the banana in his hand in 3 bites, and threw the banana peel on the ground. Akainu frowned slightly. He bent down to pick up the banana peel on the ground and held it in his palm. Then his hand turned extremely red, and a burst of smoke rose. The banana peel turned into ashes under the terrifying high temperature and spread to the sky, in the air. Porosalino, you should pay attention to your image. Some people are secretly calling you a yellow monkey. Kizaru laughed, seemingly not taking this matter to heart, but a shining golden light flashed across the brown lenses. It's really rude, but it doesn't matter. We've always been treated like monsters anyway, we're used to it. As he spoke, Kizaru clasped his hands behind his head and walked forward faster. Akainu, who was following behind, suddenly said, I've taught them a lesson. Kizaru paused, raised the corners of his mouth slightly, and made a slightly exaggerated tone. Hey, Saraski, you're a little too irritable, did you use your powers? No, there is no need to deal with those people. That's right, if I don't use the fruit power, I can't beat you. I can't beat it even if I use it. Quote. Kizaru choked hard and ignored Akainu. He put his hands in his pockets and whistled. The two walked quietly for a while, and finally stopped in front of a barbecue restaurant. Gulu. Kizaru suddenly turned his head and stared at Akainu, and asked, confused. Sakazuki, did you hear any strange noises? Akainu's face turned dark red. The sound just now clearly came from his stomach. Kizaru was obviously trying to trick him. There's no way around it. Although the food in Marine School is good, it can't be eaten every day. Akainu glanced at the tempting advertisement posted at the door of the barbecue restaurant, gritted his teeth, turned around and left without saying a word. Hey, don't go. I really want to eat barbecue today. You can eat with me once, and I'll treat you. Akainu stopped and turned back to glare at Kizaru. At this moment, the aroma of barbecue came from the store. He moved his nose and said in a deep voice, Okay, but don't eat too much. Teacher Zephyr said that too much oil will affect your training. Kizaru held his forehead and sighed softly, waved his hands helplessly and said, Okay, let's indulge this time, let's go. In a corner of the barbecue shop, Jiji and the 3 of them sat around an oven. Ginny held her chin in her hands, staring unblinkingly at the sizzling pork belly on the stove, pouting and saying, Brother Jiji, how long will it take for it to be cooked? I'm already hungry. Jiji smiled and flicked Ginny's smooth forehead with her fingers and teased. I think you're greedy. If you wait a little longer, you won't be able to learn from the bear and be patient. Hearing Gigi's praise, Shang scratched his head in embarrassment and said weakly, Brother Gigi, actually I'm a little hungry too. Okay, I'd better add more charcoal, don't blame me if it's burnt. Ginny rubbed her face against Gigi's arm and said softly, I don't blame Brother Gigi. Even if the meat is really burnt, I can still eat it all. Gigi chuckled a few times and was about to speak when a sultry tone sounded from the door of the store. Boss, is there any room left? I want a big portion of beef, fat and thin. A voice from behind was a little dull. Add 2 more bowls of white rice. Sakazuki, you really have a soft spot for rice. Hearing Sakazuki's name, Gigi paused and looked up towards the door. The waiter at the barbecue restaurant had already greeted them warmly. Under the guidance of the waiter, Kizaru and Akainu finally sat down next to Gigi. Kizaru sat down on the chair and stretched. He turned to Gigi and smiled, asking, This little brother, you seem to be looking at me all the time. Do we know each other? Gigi didn't hide it and responded with a smile. I'm sorry, I'm rude. I just think you have a unique temperament, so I couldn't help but take a few more glances. Ahem. Akainu suddenly coughed twice and silently raised his head to glance at Kizaru. Kizaru seemed to be very interested in Gigi. He automatically ignored the question of temperament and asked, Brother looks a little unfamiliar. Have you just arrived here? Yes, we are here to join the army. Upon hearing that Gigi and the other 3 were here to join the army, Kizaru immediately moved a chair and placed it next to Gigi. After sitting down, they started chatting very familiarly. That's such a coincidence. Maybe we will become classmates. Let me introduce myself. My name is Porisalino and the one over there is Sakazuki. Gigi glanced at Akainu, and Sakazuki nodded slightly, with a slightly stiff smile on his face. He also briefly introduced himself and others, Gigi said with a smile. It seems that you 2 are our future seniors. Nice to meet you. Kizaru waved his hand and said, What's wrong with seniors? The 2 of us are a bit unsociable in school. When you enter school, you may want to stay away from us. Oh, what's the reason for this? I feel very comfortable getting along with you 2. Hey, we are called monsters in school. Who would like to hang out with monsters? The 2 of us had to hug each other to keep warm. Yeah, Gigi used chopsticks to flip the meat slices on the stove and said softly. Maybe we will be the same kind of people. The expression on Kizaru's face remained unchanged. Hidden by his sunglasses, no one knew where he was looking at this time. Is this the same type of person? Haha, is this what Gigi is talking about? As he spoke, he stretched out a finger, and a cross-shaped golden light flashed on his fingertip. Some diners who heard the movement and looked here were directly flashed by the light and closed their eyes. Akainu crossed his arms and said solemnly, Porisalino, put away your powers. The light on Kizaru's fingertips instantly went out. He stood up, clasped his hands together, and bowed to the diners around him to apologize. Oops, I'm really sorry everyone, I got a little excited. After saying that, Kizaru selectively filtered out some bad sounds and sat down on his own. When he looked at Gigi again, he was stunned. A pair of Gigi's pupils were seen rotating like 2 vortexes, vaguely emitting a suction force. As he watched, Kizaru instinctively felt uncomfortable. He looked away, not wanting to look into Gigi's eyes again. Akainu also noticed strange phenomena on Gigi, but he didn't feel any awkwardness. Gigi's eyes returned to normal, she smiled and praised. That just now was probably Porisalino Senpai's ability. It's such a gorgeous ability. Kizaru did not answer the question and said seemingly casually. Brother Gigi is also a person with abilities. What a terrifying ability. Can you tell me what your ability is? This will be kept secret for the time being. Anyway, we will meet again soon. Senior, how about you let me keep it a little mysterious? Haha, of course. Kizaru doesn't mind either. Unless the Esper himself is too famous about fruit abilities, the fewer people know about them, the better. And from Kizaru's point of view, he only showed a little bit of his abilities, and he didn't show what kind of ability he was. Anyway, he just didn't suffer. But he never thought that Gigi would be a time traveler, and he already knew a lot about him and Akainu. Next, several people stopped discussing this topic and started chatting. Under Gigi's deliberate guidance, the atmosphere became harmonious. Even Akainu, who had always been averse to words, took the initiative to say a few words. After all the dishes on Kizaru's table were served, the two tables even shared dishes that the other didn't have. Akainu even reluctantly gave up and gave the bear one bowl of the two large bowls of white rice he ordered. There is also an episode. Guinea's big eater makes Akainu, a straight man with strong chauvinism, a competitive spirit. Although Ginny didn't pay attention to Akainu at all, in Akainu's heart, how could a grown man like himself not be able to eat a weak woman who was less than half his weight? He completely forgot about what he said at the beginning, don't eat too much, and just showed off to the barbecue on the plate. After showing off the last plate of barbecue, Akainu glanced at the stacked dinner plates in front of him with satisfaction, and looked at Ginny out of the corner of his eye. This look made him confused on the spot. The plates in front of Ginny could be described as a mountain, but her mouth was still busy. She picked up a large piece of barbecue and put it in her mouth. Jie and Shang on the side have long been accustomed to this kind of situation. Shang has already turned to the Bible, and Jie is still helping Ginny roast meat. Akainu touched his bloated belly and lowered his head silently, acquiescing to his defeat. Seeing Ginny eating the barbecue with relish, Akainu couldn't help laughing, thinking that he was really stunned, actually comparing this with a girl. Not only did he not feel lost in his heart, but he felt extremely relaxed. For Akainu, who had been hanging out with Kizaru at marine school, this experience was really novel. After eating countless plates of barbecue, Ginny happily picked up a tissue and wiped her mouth. When she looked up, she found that Jie and others were looking at her with a smile. Two blushes appeared on her pretty fair face. Ginny leaned against Jie and whispered, "Why are you looking at me like that? The food here is really much better than the food in Solbay country, so I can't help but eat more." Jie gently pinched Ginny's little nose and smiled. "Okay, eat more if you like. There will be many more opportunities like this in the future." Kizaru raised his hands and said cowardly, "Let me interrupt, Teacher Zephyr is very strict. Sakazuki and I haven't been out for 2 months, so you'd better be mentally prepared." "Ah, why is he like this?" Ginny's mouth tightened, and she suddenly felt that the future was gloomy. Jie was about to comfort her with a few words, but she suddenly thought of something and said happily, "It's okay, we have bear cubs here, so you can run away if you want." The bear cooperated by raising the pads in his palms, indicating that he was always at his disposal. Kizaru and Akainu also noticed the bear's palm. They looked at each other and Kizaru whispered, "Is he another Esper? Today's newcomers are so scary." When it was time to check out, Jie put a huge amount of banknotes on the counter with a wave of his hand, and said to the clerk very arrogantly, "I will pay for the consumption of these 2 tables, and any extra will be treated as a tip." Jolene Sheng has sent Jie a lot of pocket money over the years. As for how much he has sent, it is already an astronomical figure. Take Kizaru for example. Judging from his salary as an admiral in the future, he will only get a fraction of Gigi's pocket money after clocking in diligently for 180 years. What's more, Kizaru is still a student. He is mentally estimating how many bananas Jie can buy with that note. Sakazuki suddenly said with a serious face, "Jie, we don't need the money from our table. Porisalino said he would treat us this time." "Sakazuki, you talk a bit too much today. I still like the taciturn you used to be." Quote. God knows how much Kizaru wanted to kiss Akainu now. He looked at the clerk with a smile, pretending to take out his wallet. Jie held his hand and said seriously, "I've already paid. I'm very happy to meet these 2 seniors. Let me express my gratitude to you." Kizaru's hand slipped, and the wallet that had just popped out of his pocket fell back. Oops. Brother Jie, you don't need to be so polite. What's wrong with seniors? Just call us by our names in school from now on. You agree, right, Sakazuki? Akainu watched Kizaru's movements throughout. He rolled his eyes and turned his head to express that he did not recognize this embarrassing guy. After saying goodbye to Jie and his group, Kizaru and Akainu returned to the school dormitory. Before the 2 of them got their butts warm, someone knocked on the door. "Porisalino, Mr. Zephyr wants you to go to his office." Hearing Zephyr calling him, Kizaru suddenly felt a headache and muttered, "What's the matter with the old man? He doesn't let anyone rest on his days off. Akainu had already taken off his shirt and was lying on the ground doing push-ups with one hand. Kizaru rubbed his hands and asked, Sakazuki, come with me. No, Teacher Zephyr just called you. How heartless, I just treated you to a barbecue. It was invited by Jijie. Hey, that's almost it. Seeing that Sakazuki had no intention of going, Kizaru had no choice but to give up and walk towards the door with his head hanging down. Kizaru and Zephyr don't like each other. In Kizaru's opinion, it's not a good thing for Zephyr to suddenly find him. The truth was exactly what he thought. As soon as he entered the office, Zephyr saw Kizaru and scolded him directly. Porosalino, I remember telling you not to use your abilities indiscriminately outside of school, right? I've been getting complaints from all the people. Kizaru lowered his head, rolled his eyes, and muttered. Whoever is so troubled just shines. Zephyr slammed the table. What did you say? Stand at attention. A marine can't stand tall. Kizaru curled his lips, straightened his body awkwardly, and shouted. Yes, Teacher Zephyr, everything you said is right. Don't do this to me. Since everything I said is right, why haven't you listened to it? What is Sakazuki doing? Report Mr. Zephyr. He's exercising. HMPH, you still have the nerve to say that. As a user with abilities, Sakazuki has always paid great attention to physical exercise. How about you? Report to Teacher Zephyr. I also want to exercise, but you are looking for me. I think Teacher Zephyr's matters are the most important. Looking at Kizaru, who looked like a dead pig in front of him, Zephyr rubbed his forehead and said helplessly. Forget it, no matter how much you say, it's useless. You'll know after you suffer a loss on this. Report to Teacher Zephyr. Can I leave then? Zephyr waved his hand like he was shooing away flies and said impatiently. Let's go, let's continue training tomorrow, you'd better not be late for me. Yes, Kizaru gave an extremely standard military salute, turned around and left in goose step, stamping on the floor with a crackling sound. Zephyr crossed his arms and watched Kizaru leave the office. He sighed, took out a document from the drawer, looked at the photo of Jijie on it, and said to himself. Another Logia, I hope you don't give me as much headache as Porosalino. Sengoku has handed over the information about Jijie to Zephyr, and highlighted the information about Jijie to him. Naturally, he means that he wants Zephyr to focus on Jijie, a good young man. In fact, there is no need for Sengoku to say that Zephyr also knows the significance of a powerful Logia user to Marine. As for Jijie's age, he has not even thought about it. Since Zephyr left Marine Admiral and became instructor, his mentality has also changed a lot. Now he puts all his energy into educating students. Especially for good prospects like Kizaru and Akainu, he devoted even more energy. Even if this guy Kizaru often confronts him, the most he can do is scold him. Of course, this is also because Kizaru's own talent is strong enough. Although Kizaru is just doing nothing all day long, Zephyr knows it well. Even if Kizaru is not a sparkling fruit user, based on his current physical skills and swordsmanship, basically no one in the school is his opponent except Akainu. Zephyr often thinks how great it would be if Kizaru could train half as hard as Akainu. The reason why he is always so harsh to Kizaru is not because he hates Kizaru, he just hates it. On the day of registration, Bab's Rear Admiral came to Jiji's residence early and led them to Marine School. After sending Jijie and the others to the gate of Marine School, Bab stopped and said with a smile. I can only send it here. After entering, go straight to the office building. The top floor is the Zephyr instructor's office. Jijie shook hands with Babs and said, Babu's Rear Admiral, I'm sorry to trouble you at this time. Haha, this is what I should do. The three of them are all rare talents. Their future achievements will definitely not be comparable to mine. When the time comes, I will have to call them officers. After saying that, several people looked at each other and smiled. Babs waved his hand, turned and left. The three of Jijie entered the school. On the way, Jijie noticed that there were many students doing physical training on the training ground. Among them was an acquaintance, Akainu, who had just had barbecue together not long ago. Akainu stood alone in the corner of the training ground, with various training equipment placed around him. At this moment, he was training with a barbell. Just looking at the size of the barbell, it's not something that a normal person can lift. It's obviously specially made. Such a barbell is like a toy in Akainu's hands, and there is no sense of any difficulty on his body. The students who passed by him were already not surprised. They only glanced at him and continued to do their own things. Akainu seemed to realize that someone had been looking at him. He looked up and saw the three Jijie standing outside the venue. Jinny waved to Shang, while Jijie gave a thumbs up to Akainu on the field. Akainu threw away the barbell in his hand, and the barbell fell to the ground with a dull sound. The people around him glanced at this, and then they were stunned. Because Sakazuki, who had always had a poker face in their minds, was actually smiling and waving in one direction. Although the smile looked a little stiff, it could be seen that Akainu was trying his best to smile. They followed Akainu's line of sight and saw Jijie, and immediately started talking. Unfamiliar face, who is that? I don't know him. He must be a newcomer here to report. Are there any new people joining at this time? It seems that the qualifications are good. The enrollment standards of this class are not low. Well, it seems that he also knows Sakazuki. Except for Porisalino, he usually doesn't talk to anyone else at all. I guess they are fellow villagers. Tisk, tisk, it must be another monster. Shish, stop talking. Have you forgotten those people last time? Sakazuki caught him saying bad things about Porisalino, and he was beaten so hard that he lay in the hospital for half a month. As soon as these words came out, the discussion stopped abruptly. They remember that those people were quite smart at the time and used words to irritate Sakazuki, saying that he would only rely on his ability and don't use his ability if he has the ability. The strength of those few people is pretty good among the students, and I feel that if Akainu doesn't use his abilities, they still have a good chance of winning. However, the reality is cruel. Akainu really has no ability, so he used a pair of fists to beat the people who were nicknamed behind them until they were unconscious on the spot. This also lets everyone know that the gap between them and Akainu is more than just a devil fruit. Outside the court, Jijie was about to continue walking forward after saying hello to Akainu. Suddenly, he stopped and suddenly raised his hand to grab him. Zephyr, who appeared behind Jijie at some point, looked at his grabbed arm in surprise and praised. Nice reaction, you must be Jijie. Zephyr came early today and saw Akainu and Jijie greet each other. He was surprised and happy about this. Akainu and Kizaru, two top students, have some problems in their personalities. In fact, Kizaru is not bad, at most he gives Zephyr a headache, but Akainu is different. Zephyr has always been worried about him. Because Akainu is a little too dull, his views on some things are very extreme, he doesn't like to talk, and he doesn't socialize much. As an older generation of Marine, Zephyr always thinks that Marine is a collective. He wants Akainu to get out of his closed heart and actively integrate into the big family of Marine. So he was very happy to see the small change Akainu showed today. When he saw that the other person was Jijie who came to report, Zephyr ran over excitedly. He wanted to pat Jijie from behind, but he didn't expect Jijie's perception to be so strong that he was noticed as soon as he moved. Jijie let go of his hand, bowed slightly to Zephyr, and said, Teacher Zephyr, I am Jijie who is here to report today. Zephyr smiled and nodded, very satisfied with Jijie's performance. At least compared to Kizaru and Akainu, two problem teenagers, Jijie looked quite normal. Jinny and Shang also greeted Zephyr. Zephyr was about to speak when a rhythmic voice came, It's Jijie, I saw you as soon as I came. It seems that today will be a happy day. Everyone turned their heads and saw Kizaru with one hand in his pocket and the other hand pinching the sunglasses on his face, walking towards this side slowly. Seeing Kizaru's appearance, Zephyr, who was originally in a good mood, suddenly looked like he had eaten a fly, and his face suddenly became gloomy. He glared and shouted, Borsalino, what time is it? Look at what other students are doing. Kizaru just adjusted his sunglasses and looked carefully. He found Zephyr standing next to Jijie. His face changed and he muttered, Well, today is not a happy day. He adjusted his posture slightly and said, Good morning, Teacher Zephyr. The students are really hardworking. It's not time yet and they've started training. He deliberately emphasized the tone of the 4 words, not time yet, and Zephyr's forehead was blue. Considering that there were new students next to him, Zephyr suppressed the idea of giving Kizaru a big slap in the face. His face was serious and he said in a deep voice, "Enough, today's training time is up, go to the field and gather immediately." After that, Zephyr flashed into the training field directly. Kizaru shrugged and said to Jijie and the other two, "The old man has this temper, you'll get used to it." Then, he put his hands on his eyes as if looking out, and said with a slanted pout, "Sakazuki is really something, why did he get up so early, making the old man crazy again?" Jijie said, "Maybe this is the legendary Curling King." Curling King, it sounds very impressive, what does it mean? Well, it means to describe a person who is very hardworking. I see, hey, why are you so hardworking? The time is clearly stipulated, and there's nothing wrong with training on time. What do you think, Jijie? Jijie couldn't help laughing after hearing this, thinking that he was worthy of being Kizaru. Maybe it was true that he punched into work after becoming an admiral. Paddling Kizaru on the shoulder, Jijie said seriously, "You're right." Kizaru's eyes lit up, and he naturally stretched out his arm and put it on Jijie's shoulders, and said loudly, "I knew we were getting along. Let's go, otherwise the old man will be angry again." Ginny looked at the backs of the two of them and pouted. Brother Jijie won't let him lead us into trouble. The image of Jijie wearing sunglasses and crooked mouth automatically appeared in her mind, and she couldn't help but shudder. The bear shook his head and whispered, "No, Brother Jijie is much more mature than us. He will not be easily influenced by others. What's more, this senior Porisalino is not a bad person, he just has a special temperament, huh?" "Oh, Shangzai, you are so serious. Don't I know Brother Jijie as well as you do?" "Well, I know that Sister Ginny cares too much about Brother Jijie, so sometimes she thinks too much." Ginny's face turned red instantly, and she twirled her toes on the ground. "Shangzai, what are you talking about? I also care about you and Brother Ivan." The bear still shook his head and muttered, "It's different, it's different." Ginny covered her ears and ran away, leaving behind a sentence. "Shangzai, Brother Jijie is right, you are a straight man. You will be a bachelor from now on." The bear watched from behind as Ginny caught up with Jijie, a smile on his face. At this moment, a loud bell rang, and the surrounding students began to gather towards the center of the field. Zephyr stood there with his hands behind his back, and his eyelids jumped again when he saw Kizaru and Jijie walking arm in arm. Fortunately, Kizaru didn't cause any trouble for him this time. He took Jijie and Shang and stood at the back of the team, in line with Akainu. Ginny went to the female cadet team by herself. After the team stood up, Zephyr cleared his throat and said loudly, "There are 3 new students here today. Before the training begins, let them come up and introduce themselves." Ba bang bang. The students all turned to look at Jijie and Shang behind them, and then there was a burst of welcoming applause, with Kizaru clapping the loudest. Shang was the first to take the stage to introduce himself. The students looked at him with his hill-like figure and gasped. When he said that he was Demon Fruit Power, they exclaimed again. Zephyr's expression remained unchanged. He had already learned about bears from Sengoku. After all, he had also experienced the Battle of the Valley of the Gods. He knew what was going on when he heard about the meatball fruit. He didn't say much. Anyway, he is no longer an admiral. As long as they are sent here, they are all his students. He doesn't care about the bad things of celestial dragons. And since he is his student and an ability user, he must first have a general understanding of the bear's abilities so that he can conduct targeted training, so Zephyr asked the bear to demonstrate his abilities first. The bear nodded. He clasped his hands together in front of his chest, and then slowly pulled them apart. A very cute-looking transparent meatball appeared between his palms. Some female students below could not help but exclaimed, "This ability is so cute." The bear's face turned slightly red and he lowered his head shyly. Some male students curled their lips, thinking that Paramesh's fruits are always so flashy, so it's probably another ability that is only seen as useless. Zephyr's expression became serious. He could feel the power contained in the transparent flesh ball. He waved to the students below and said, "Everyone spread out. Let the bear show off his abilities." After Zephyr finished speaking, everyone came behind the bear. The bear pushed with both hands, and the transparent meatball from his palm slowly flew out and floated above an open space. Shang looked back at Jie, and Jie smiled and nodded at him. When everyone's eyes were attracted by the floating transparent meatball, Shang said softly. Bear paw impact. Boom. The transparent meatball suddenly exploded, and a dazzling white light burst out, followed by a terrifying impact that spread out, covering most of the training ground. When everything stopped, there was not a single weed to be seen on the site that had been ravaged by the shock wave. As far as the eye could see, there was only bare ground. The people behind the bear were stunned by the scene in front of them. Zephyr crossed his arms with a look of horror on his face. Paramesh's devil fruit has always had mixed results, but after all, the meatball fruit was a fruit selected by celestial dragons, so Zephyr was quite looking forward to the meatball fruit's ability, but he didn't expect that the meatball fruit would perform so well. In terms of its destructive power, it can be seen that the meatball fruit is a top-notch Paramesha devil fruit. Zephyr's eyes flashed. He looked at the bear's burly figure and thought to himself that he had found another treasure. Among the crowd at the back, Kizaru had already opened his mouth into an "oh" shape and said exaggeratedly. How terrifying. Is there such an exaggerated Paramesha? A serious look appeared on Akainu's face. He couldn't help but look at Jie, who was calm on the side. He clearly remembered that the bear called Jie his big brother. Now that the bear has shown such a powerful ability, what about this ability to be the big brother? What could it be? On the female students' side, some of the female students who had previously thought the bear's ability was cute were still in a daze. Only Ginny clapped her hands excitedly and shouted, "Beer boy is awesome." Zephyr also came to his senses. He reached out and patted the bear's waist and praised. "Very good. Your ability development has reached this point. If you train hard, I am very much looking forward to your future." The bear scratched his head shyly. He first bowed to Zephyr, and then retreated back to the group under the awe-inspiring eyes of everyone. After he left, Ginny volunteered to stand up. Her slim figure and pretty face immediately attracted the attention of all the male students. Looking at the lively and beautiful Ginny, a smile appeared on Zephyr's serious face. He took out a military flintlock and handed it to Ginny and said, "Ginny, I've seen your profile, and it says you're good at marksmanship. Come and show it, too." Ginny did not take the pistol handed over by Zephyr. Under Zephyr's stunned expression, she quickly turned around and took out a golden pistol from the marine vest on her chest, then turned back suddenly and said with a smile, "I'm sorry, Teacher Zephyr, I still like to use this gun that Brother Jie gave me." Looking at the golden pistol shining in the sun, and then at the beggar's version in his hand, Zephyr coughed twice in embarrassment, but he still pointed out seriously, "That gun is a bit too conspicuous, and your position will be easily exposed on the battlefield." Ginny glanced at Jie over there, waved her hand and said, "Teacher Zephyr is right, but I believe Brother Jie will protect me." As soon as these words came out, there was a burst of cheers and the heartbreak of some male students. Jie helplessly spread his hands, looking like he was in Versailles to everyone. Zephyr didn't say anything when he saw the situation and signaled Ginny to start. Ginny's little face looked flushed, and her heart was beating fast. She didn't know what was wrong with her, but she just said such a word out of nowhere, which was like confessing her love in public. But Ginny is not a pretentious little girl. Now that the words have been spoken, there is nothing to regret. She held her breath and concentrated, quickly adjusted her condition, raised her hand and fired several shots at the target placed in the distance. Zephyr's eyesight is very good, and he can clearly see the red hearts in the middle of all the targets even from a long distance away, and the gun has 10 rings. After Ginny's results were announced, there was another burst of applause, and Zephyr also gave himself recognition. Ginny raised her pistol and turned to look at Jie expectantly. When she saw Jie also applauding, she happily puffed up her proud chest and turned back to the team. Ginny embarked on the path of gun skills because of the advice given to her by Jie. Although the presence of guns in the pirate world is not as strong as that of swords, there are still several representative strongmen for reference, such as Beckman and Yasop. In the world of pirates, except for monsters like Big Mom, most women are indeed physically inferior to men, which makes it difficult for them to reach the top in swordsmanship and physical skills. If women want to improve their strength, besides devil fruit, gun skills are definitely a good choice. Jie is still very pleased with Ginny's performance today. He is already thinking about finding a devil fruit for Ginny that suits her in the future, preferably one that can perfectly match her gun skills. When he was thinking about what kind of fruit was suitable for Ginny, Kizaru on the side hugged him with his shoulder and whispered, "It's your turn, Jie. It's time you let me know what you're capable of." Jie was stunned for a moment, and when he looked up, he realized that everyone was looking at him. He nodded slightly, strode out of the team, and came to Zephyr's side. At Zephyr's signal, Jie smiled slightly and said, "Hello everyone, my name is Darkside Jie. I am 15 years old and a user with Logia Dark Fruit ability." Quote. Before Jie could show off his abilities, everyone just fell into silence after hearing the words Logia Dark Fruit, and the surroundings instantly became silent. There was nothing they could do about why everyone behaved like this. It was because Kizaru and Akainu left such a deep impression on them. Even though Jie always maintained a harmless smile on his face, they still couldn't help but classify Jie as a monster in their hearts. Kizaru stared at Jie standing in front and said to himself, "Is it any wonder that I felt a little awkward when I first saw him? Darkness is the opposite of light." Jie saw no reaction from everyone for a long time, then turned to Zephyr and said, "Teacher Zephyr, do I still want to show my ability?" Zephyr did not agree immediately. He suddenly glanced at Kizaru at the back of the team. Kizaru was shocked when he saw it. He quickly lowered his head and muttered, "It's broken, old man, what do you think I'm doing? I mean it's not a good thing." "Come whatever you want," Zephyr's voice came from the front. "Porosalino, you are the light and Jie is the darkness. It is up to you to cooperate with Jie to show the power of dark fruit." Kizaru had the word, reluctance, written all over his face. He raised his hands and said, "Teacher Zephyr, Jie is still a newcomer, and he is Logia. If one of them fails to control himself later..." Zephyr interrupted angrily, "You don't have to worry about this anymore, come up here now." Well, sighing heavily, Kizaru lowered his head and walked to the opposite side of Jie. Zephyr added next to him, "Be more serious later. If I find you busy with business, I will cancel your extra allowance for this month." "Nani, Teacher Zephyr, you can't joke about this. Who are you kidding? You haven't had a serious battle in a long time, right? I have to see if you have made any progress recently." Then Sakazuki, I don't have to worry about this at all. As for you." Zephyr crossed his arms and squinted at Kizaru, his meaning self-evident. Kizaru wanted to struggle a few more times, but Zephyr kicked him on the butt and said angrily, "Stop talking nonsense. Let's get started." After saying that, Zephyr directed the other students to retreat to the edge of the training ground, leaving the entire training ground to Jie and Kizaru, which was enough for 2 Logia cards. Kizaru patted the big black shoe print on his butt, muttered something unknown, then looked up at Jie and asked, "Jie, shall we start?" Jie responded with a smile. "Please give me your advice, Porosalino." As soon as he finished speaking, Kizaru raised his hand and shot out a laser. The laser directly penetrated Jie's body and exploded to the rear. A large charred pit was instantly blasted out on the ground. Kizaru had already anticipated this situation. In his opinion, since Jie is Logia, it must be able to elementalize. Energy attacks of this level are definitely ineffective. His move is purely to disgust Zephyr. Zephyr just said that he only cares about fighting and does not need to worry about the rest, so he needs to let dear teacher Zephyr worry more about repairing the field. Anyway, just seeing Zephyr's black face makes him feel happy. But Zephyr knew Kizaru very well. He shouted to Kizaru with a stern face, "Porosalino, didn't I tell you how to deal with Logia?" Kizaru pouted, knowing that he couldn't continue the performance. He raised his leg, and a layer of dark-armed color slowly adhered to his calf, causing all the students to exclaim, "Is that a weapon color? Porosalino has already mastered it. This guy hides it well enough. I've never seen him use it before. Is there a possibility that he won't have to use weapons to deal with us?" "Well, that's true, but do you think Sakazuki can do it too?" "That's a matter between monsters. Let's ask less. Knowing too much will only upset your heart. This Jie is going to be in trouble. Without weapons, he can't threaten the opponent at all." Zephyr nodded slightly. Judging from Kizaru's performance, he had a relatively good grasp of weapon colors. He had another reason for letting Kizaru use the weapon color, which was to let Jijie, a Logia user, feel what it feels like to be hit. After decades of marine career, Zephyr has also met some Logia ability users. Almost all of these people have a common problem, which is that they are too dependent on elementalization. He wanted Jijie to realize this in advance, so that Jijie should not be overconfident just because he is a Logia user, and should pay more attention to physical training. Kizaru kindly reminded Jijie. Jijie, be careful later, you may get hurt. Jijie didn't seem to know Haki's power, and still looked calm, which meant that Kizaru could come as he pleased. Kizaru pushed up the sunglasses on his face, and his body emitted a golden light. He turned into a stream of light and appeared in front of Jijie, and swept Jijie's waist with a horizontal kick. He was extremely fast, and by the time the people on the court reacted, Kizaru's right leg had already kicked Jijie. However, the imagined scene of Jijie being kicked away did not appear. Kizaru's right leg covered in armed colors actually passed directly through Jijie's body. Kizaru didn't expect this to happen at all. He was so confused that he made a 360-degree spin directly in front of Jijie under the influence of inertia. At the end, he staggered and almost fell to the ground. After standing firm, he glanced at the armed color on his right leg that had not dissipated, then raised his head and stared at Jijie in disbelief. Not to mention him, even Zephyr on the sidelines was shocked. With rich combat experience, he quickly thought that Jijie had predicted Kizaru's attack and transferred the elementalized body in advance. Thinking of this, Zephyr was even more shocked, because this meant that Jijie had awakened observation Haki, and the intensity was not low. Because Kizaru's ability to increase speed is very terrifying, ordinary observation Haki simply cannot keep up with Kizaru's speed. Zephyr couldn't help but think of the scene when Jijie grabbed his arm at the entrance of the training ground, and he suddenly became more convinced. Thinking of Jijie's age, Zephyr no longer knew what to say. Even without dark fruit, Jijie is a true genius. What he didn't know was that Jijie's situation was completely different from what he thought. After Jijie became a dark fruit user, he discovered that dark fruit can actually be elementalized. However, due to the characteristics of darkness, the attacks received will be automatically absorbed, and finally fed back to the main body at the cost of doubled pain. In order to avoid this shortcoming, Jijie developed another type of elementalization, which is to hide the elementalized body into a dark space to achieve the effect of avoiding attacks. The advantage of this approach is that it can dodge almost all attacks, even Haki. Of course, the disadvantage is that after entering this state, Jijie cannot attack others. And even though Jijie itself is dark, it is easy to get lost in the endless darkness if you put your body into the dark space for too long. The time of entry cannot exceed 10 minutes at a time. However, as Jijie develops the fruit's abilities, the duration will gradually increase. This method was inspired by Obito Kamui in Hokage, so Jijie named this special element Kamui. Kizaru didn't give up and wanted to test it a few times, but Jijie didn't give him this chance. A black vortex appeared in Jijie's palm. Kizaru instinctively felt a sense of crisis, and his body instantly turned into photons and dispersed toward the back. Jijie slowly raised his right hand and said softly, "Universal pull." The countless light points formed by Kizaru suddenly stopped, then all flew in the direction just now, and finally condensed into Kizaru's appearance. His shoulders were tightly held by Jijie, and there was a rare look of panic on his face. Because he found that he couldn't activate his ability. Looking at the panicked Kizaru in front of him, Jijie slowly said, "This is the power of dark fruit. It is darkness that swallows everything, including devil fruit. As long as a person with abilities is caught by me, he will lose his abilities." Nani. As soon as these words came out, not only Kizaru, but also everyone else exclaimed. They could not imagine that such a devil fruit could exist in this world. Even Zephyr encountered this situation for the first time. He wanted Kizaru to teach Jijie a lesson, but the result was the other way around. He had just said a few days ago that Kizaru would suffer a loss in ability, but he really didn't expect it to happen so quickly. After all, sparkling fruit is so comprehensive. It not only has amazing destructive power, but also has high mobility. Even if it encounters an enemy that cannot be dealt with, it can still run away. Originally, He thought that darkness and light should be opposites, but what happened now completely subverted his understanding. The speed of light seems so powerless in the face of the gravity of darkness. Coupled with the characteristics of dark fruit that can suppress devil fruit's ability, dark fruit is simply a sparkling fruit. Kizaru also realized this. He quickly calmed down and immediately covered his arms with armed colors, preparing to compete with Jijie in taijutsu. His thinking is very clear. He did suffer a big loss in terms of devil fruit ability, but he doesn't think he will lose to Jijie in terms of physical skills. Do you really think he is fishing every day in marine school? Since one shoulder was buckled by Jijie, he concentrated all his strength on the other arm and punched Jijie in the abdomen. In this position, Jijie can't dodge at all. If he uses Kamui, he will lose control of Kizaru. It seems that he can only choose to receive Kizaru's punch forcefully. Under everyone's gaze, Jijie's hand on Kizaru's shoulder suddenly emitted a ball of cyan lightning. Kizaru's fist was just halfway out when his whole body was convulsed by the electricity. Thump! Kizaru fell to his knees on his back, a wisp of white smoke coming out of his mouth. This time, not only Kizaru was numb, but Zephyr and all the students were also numb, as if they had also been electrocuted. Kizaru was actually just dizzy for a moment and soon regained consciousness. Jijie reached out and pulled him up, patted the dust on his body, and asked with concern. Porosalino, are you feeling okay? Kizaru tilted his head feebly and held back a sentence for a long time. Jijie, dark fruit still has the ability to discharge electricity. Jijie explained casually. Of course not. The ability to discharge electricity comes from the fur tribe and is considered a racial talent. Kizaru suddenly said, That's it. It turns out you are from the fur tribe. As he said that, he looked at Jijie with a puzzled expression and asked. But your skin looks quite smooth. Where did the hair grow? Could it be? Kizaru's expression suddenly became very vulgar, and he glanced at Jijie's pants. Jijie's face darkened, and he said angrily. Where do you see it? My parents are both humans. Ah, then how could you? Jijie fell silent and pulled up his clothes, revealing the scars crisscrossing his chest. Kizaru's face froze, and his expression gradually became serious. He did not continue to ask, but silently patted Jijie's shoulder. Jijie acted as if nothing had happened. He waved to the bear. The bear immediately used his ability and appeared next to Jijie. This move once again made everyone marvel. Needless to say, there is no need to say much about the tacit understanding between Shang and Jijie. Jijie just glanced at Kizaru, and Shang immediately understood what Jijie meant. Under Kizaru's confused gaze, the bear raised his hand and pressed it on Kizaru's chest, and then, a red translucent flesh ball emerged from Kizaru's back. Something that shocked everyone happened again. Kizaru, who was still sluggish just now, suddenly became lively and energetic, as if he was not the one who had been electrocuted just now. Kizaru felt relaxed all over. He did a few stretching movements on the spot and said with a surprised look on his face. It feels so relaxing. What's going on? The bear explained his abilities very patiently. After hearing this, two cross-shaped golden lights appeared in Kizaru's eyes, and the way he looked at the bear became different. The ability to pop out pain and fatigue, but anyone who knows the industry knows how ridiculously valuable this ability is. It can be said that once the bear showed the ability of the meatball fruit, he became the well-deserved big treasure in Marine. Zephyr on the sidelines was clenching his fists. God knows how excited he was at this moment. He even wanted to hold Sengoku and kiss him hard. If the bear was still regarded as a gift from Jijie, now that the bear's ability is revealed, his value has become completely independent. Shang, a being who not only has huge output, but also has a full milk supply. Zephyr has completely ignored Shang's former slave status. He believes that Sengoku will not dwell on this after knowing about it. Talent like this should belong to Marine. To hell with all the celestial dragons. So far, the performance of Jijie and others has completely exceeded his imagination, especially Jijie and Shang, the two biggest surprises. He couldn't wait to tell Sengoku what happened today. Back to Jijie, Kizaru was twisting his waist and relaxing in an enchanting way. The red meatball behind him suddenly trembled, and then slowly approached Kizaru. Kizaru immediately noticed something was wrong, and his body instantly turned into photons and flashed aside, but the meatball still floated towards him unhurriedly, and the speed was gradually increasing. GJ shouted to Kizaru, who had already moved to the edge of the field. Porosalino, if no one can bear the impact of the bear's pop-up, it will eventually come back to you. Kizaru shouted while dodging. Then what should I do now? Do I have to keep flashing around like this? GJ stretched out his hand, and a few streams of darkness gathered in his hand, and finally turned into a black Bible. A gust of breeze blew by, and the Bible opened with a splash, and an expanding dark tornado emerged from it, throwing out a man who looked half dead. This was an unlucky man GJ had caught when he was in Solbay country. Pirates. This man is also the last one imprisoned in the GJ Bible. He is more or less a pirate, so his physique is pretty good. The other unlucky ones have long since starved to death inside and been decomposed by the darkness. Items that have been placed around Logia users for a long time can be transformed by elements. For this point, please refer to the rose flower Akainu wears on his chest later. GGE's Bible has been successfully transformed by him and used as a storage space. Because it is a fixed dark space, the violent dark power can be better controlled, and people or objects placed inside can be stored for a long time. The bear bent down, reached out and picked up the unlucky pirate on the ground like a chicken, and threw it into the meatball that popped out of Kizaru's body. This pirate had his last breath left. After contact with the meatball, he couldn't even scream and died completely. The body was directly swallowed up by the darkness released by GJ. A set of operations is performed smoothly, and others are stunned for a while. After Kizaru saw the meatball disappear, he returned to GJ with a swish and praised. This method is great. I will definitely catch a few more pirates and give them to you in the future. GJ put away the Bible and said with a smile. Catching pirates is hard work. Aren't you tired? You still understand me, but with the bear's ability, it's not a bad thing to prepare more pirates. The two looked at each other and smiled. Although Kizaru looked a little uneasy, he was not a stingy person. If he lost, he would lose. He would not create any rift with GJ because of this matter. On the contrary, the relationship between the two changed. Better. What's more, after this battle, GGE's performance can be said to have conquered everyone, and it has also been recognized by Kizaru and Akainu. Now they truly recognize GJ. Even though they seemed to be isolated from others in marine school, in other words, weren't they isolated from others? If the gap between people is too big, it will be difficult to play together. After GJ and others returned to the team, Akainu cast a fiery gaze directly at GJ and said excitedly, GJ, what you just did was so beautiful. This is how you should deal with pirates. I will make you my friend. GJ was stunned for a moment. He thought Akainu was aroused to fight. It was because of this for a long time. But thinking about Akainu's performance in the manga, this is indeed very Akainu. Faced with such an opportunity to gain favor, GJ naturally would not let it go. He immediately stretched out his hand towards Akainu and said with a smile. What are you talking about? Haven't we already become friends? Akainu nodded vigorously, and he held GGE's hand without hesitation. His tone was extremely serious. You're right, we are friends. Kizaru on the side suddenly raised his hands and shouted. Hey, hey, hey. What about me? Sakazuki, have you forgotten me? We have known each other for so long, why didn't I hear you say this to me? What is our relationship? Good guy. These words sounded a bit ambiguous, and a drop of cold sweat flowed from GGE's forehead. Looking at Akainu again, under GGE's observation, his face gradually turned red, and a few wisps of steaming heat floated out from it. GJ immediately wanted to withdraw his hand because he felt that his hand was a little hot. Some discerning people around had already stepped back to make room for GJ, Akainu and Kizaru. Just when GJ was about to use Kamui, Akainu finally returned to normal. He let go of his hand, straightened the marine hat on his head, and said, Porosalino, you are my friend too. This is right. Kizaru raised the corners of his mouth and put his arms behind his head contentedly. The performance of the three of them was noticed by Zephyr, with a pleased smile on his face. The three GJ will definitely become Marine's top combat force in the future. If they can still stick together, then he really can't think of any force on the sea that can compete with Marine at that time. So he made a decision immediately and said, The performance of the three newcomers is great. Jie, let me allocate dormitories to you and Shang first. You two share a dormitory with Sakazuki and the others. They happen to have 2 spots left. Akainu certainly had no objections to Zephyr's arrangement. Even Kizaru, who had always liked to go against Zephyr, nodded in agreement. The 2 beds in their dormitory have been empty for a long time. There is no way, no one wants to live with these 2 monsters. Ginny was a girl, so she was naturally assigned to the girls' dormitory in the end. She was very popular because of her cheerful and lively personality, not to mention the relationship between Jie and Shang, so no one would bother her. After everything was arranged, Zephyr saw that it was getting late and thought that he might as well get here today and start formal training tomorrow. He was indeed in a good mood today and planned to go to the pub with Sengoku and Garp for a drink in the evening. Thinking of this, he waved his hand and announced the disbandment on the spot. The students suddenly burst into cheers, but after a long time, no one left the training ground. Most of the students gathered around Jie. They hoped to get to know Jie better. After all, compared to Kizaru and Akainu, Jie seemed to be much easier to get along with. There is no shortage of smart people here. Judging from Jiji's performance today, his future achievements will definitely reach a level that people look up to. Although everyone is a trainee now, this is Marine. After graduation, it will be easy for people like Jie, Kizaru and Akainu to get military merit, and their military ranks will rise like a rocket. In the past, Kizaru and Akainu were not easy to get close to because of their weird personalities, but after Jie came, these two seemed to be much more normal. With Jie as a bond, they could at least talk a few words. Talked. So not only was there a lot of excitement around Jie, there were also people trying to talk to Kizaru Akainu. If you can embrace these 3 thighs now and become a follower of any of them, then it will be much easier to get involved in Marine in the future. Moreover, Marine is not an easy profession. The mortality rate is very high. You may encounter a powerful pirate group at sea one day and you will be finished. If you have a good relationship with Jie and the others, no matter what happens, you may be able to save your life at a critical moment. This is definitely a matter of no harm. Kizaru had one hand in his pocket, still looking carefree, and would just say a few words when someone came to see him. Akainu folded his arms and looked like he was keeping away from strangers, but he was determined to come to him. There were 2 Jie who he knew, namely the future Marine Vice Admiral, Doberman and Ghost Spider. In fact, Shang's performance is also very eye-catching, but he feels a bit boring. Even though he is large, he has a weak sense of presence, and the least number of people come to him. Besides, everyone can see that Shang is completely focused on Jie, so it is better to go directly to Jie to find him. As the youngest and best-looking among the group, Jie was originally the most popular and had the most female students around him. Surrounded by all the warblers and swallows, even Jie was a little nervous and could only maintain an awkward but polite smile. Among the male students who were looking for Jie were Flying Squirrel and Huo Shaoshan. He deliberately spoke to these 2 people a few more words. Feeling Jiji's special attention, the 2 men actually felt a little elated. Just when Jie and others were surrounded and unable to move, Ginny finally squeezed through the crowd, threw herself into Jiji's arms without hesitation, and said softly, "Brother Jie, I'm hungry. Let's go eat." The next day, after having a refreshing drink with Sengoku and the others last night, Zephyr got up early and came to the training ground to inspect as usual. The Marine School's training ground was very large. He habitually looked towards the area with the most people on weekdays, but he only saw a few scattered students, all of whom were female students. Zephyr's face darkened, thinking that yesterday's training must have ended too early, allowing those boys to seize the opportunity to go out and hang out, and now they are probably still sleeping soundly in the dormitory. It seems that we can no longer set such a precedent in the future. They are still young, how can they slack off at this time? How could they sleep? Just when Zephyr was thinking about waiting for everyone to gather and then start training with the devil, a burst of shouting came. 99, 100. Sakazuki is awesome. Jie is getting faster and faster. Come on Jie. Porisalino, what are you doing? Oh my god, is he asleep? Zephyr was stunned for a moment, and looked in the direction where the sound came from. He saw that Sakazuki's exclusive corner was full of people. He counted, and with the few girls in the center of the venue, the students had already arrived. Done. Because there were so many people, Zephyr could only know through the shouts of the students that Jije and the other three were also there, and even Kizaru, who always liked to get stuck. Curious, he held his breath and quietly came behind the flying squirrel. The flying squirrel didn't even notice Zephyr behind him. He was stretching his neck and cheering for Jije in front of him with a red face. In the open space in the center of the crowd, Jije, Kizaru and Akainu were lying shirtless on the ground, each holding a large barbell and doing presses. Ginny on the side was holding a stopwatch to time, but her eyes were always on Jije, and she didn't know if she would be able to hold down the stopwatch accurately later. Seeing this scene, Zephyr, who was a little angry at first, lost all his anger in an instant, and he was even quite happy. Although he didn't know what was going on, the sight of the students mingling together made him feel happy. But when he turned his attention to Kizaru, he immediately scolded him out of habit. Pelusalino, you are lazy again. Is there glue on the barbell? It's stuck to your belly, right? Kizaru, who had been wandering on the ground for a long time, trembled when he heard Zephyr's voice. He subconsciously raised the barbell and pushed hard twice, but it quickly withered. Zephyr's voice also made others notice his presence, and they all turned to look at him. Ahem. Zephyr coughed twice, blaming that Porosalino in his mind. I want to observe him for a while longer. Now that he had been exposed, Zephyr's next performance was beyond all the students' expectations. He put away his serious face and said with a smile, "You continue, it's still early, haven't they decided the winner yet?" After speaking, he took the lead and shouted, "Everyone, work harder. Whoever wins this month, I will give him a double subsidy." This reward is actually not attractive to Jije and Sakazuki. After all, one of them is not short of money and the other is focused on the game. Only Kizaru, after hearing these words, his eyes suddenly glowed, and he finally got the energy to push. However, he fished for too long, and before he could push a few times, Ginny clicked the stopwatch and cheered. The game is over. Brother Jije is so awesome. You and Sakazuki are tied for first place. Kizaru, who came in second and last place, lay on the ground like an eggplant beaten by frost, and complained bitterly. Mr. Zephyr, why didn't you tell me earlier? It's a waste of your efforts. Zephyr gave him a look. The opportunity has been given to you. Who do you blame for not being able to grasp it? The three people on the ground stood up one after another, and Ginny immediately put a coat on Jije, attracting envious looks from all the male students. Akainu picked up the coat on the ground and put it on, covering his strong upper body. In fact, there are still many female students who like Akainu, a tough guy, but he looks so fierce that no female students dare to approach him. Of course Akainu wouldn't care about this kind of thing. He said while fastening his buttons. Jije, you are very strong, much stronger than that guy from Pelusalino. Jije shuddered and wondered why Akainu was always so angry when he spoke. However, Jije still admires Akainu in his heart. You must know that his physical talent is among the best. After all, he is the blood of the Figolando family, and his body has been specially modified. Although Akainu's talent is not low, it is not as good as Jije is still a lot worse than Jije. The tie in the game is entirely the result of Akainu's hard work. Kizaru sat cross-legged on the ground, sighing. He was still regretting losing the double subsidy. Akainu still understands Kizaru very well and comforted him very considerately. Porosalino, even if you use your full strength in the beginning, it will be difficult to defeat me and Jije. Don't worry too much about this. Quote. Kizaru looked at Akainu speechlessly and complained. I said, Sakazuki, are you comforting me or trying to hit me? Of course I'm trying to comfort you. Pooch. Hearing the conversation between the two, Ginny couldn't help bursting out laughing, holding Jije's hand and saying, Brother Jije, they are so interesting. Not only Ginny, but also the students who were watching were made to laugh by Akainu and Kizaru. They suddenly discovered that these two beings they once regarded as monsters actually had such a cute side. After the group was disbanded yesterday, Jije invited all the students out for a big meal. We were all young people. They sat together for a few drinks and then let go quickly. Those students who were beaten up by Akainu even apologized to Akainu and Kizaru face to face under the influence of alcohol. The most exciting one was Ginny. She had an amazing appetite, but she had the opposite ability to drink. She got drunk after just a few drinks. At that time, she was wrapped around Gigi like a little snake. She said something that makes her think about it now. If you can't help but find a crack in the ground to crawl in. On the way back, she also told Shang that if she got drunk again in the future, she would use her power to pop the alcohol out of her body, otherwise she would be really embarrassed to see others. When she met Gigi at the training ground today, her face was still red. Fortunately, Gigi didn't have the chance to bring up the topic last night. He was directly dragged to the game by Akainu. But in this way, Ginny was a little disappointed, as if she had said everything in vain. The little girl's thoughts are always so complicated. Ginny looked up at Gigi's side face, her eyes gradually blurred. It wasn't until Zephyr called for gathering that she came back to her senses. She reluctantly let go of Gigi and ran to join the little sisters she had just met. As usual, before starting each day's training, Zephyr will talk about the day's training goals. Today he is talking about 6-position training. Before Gigi and the other 3 arrived, Zephyr had already told others the training methods of the 6 postures. However, the 6 postures are not so easy to learn. Let alone the 6 postures, students who can master one of them proficiently are currently all a rare existence. Marine's future veteran vice admiral, such as Flying Squirrel and Ghost Spider, has only learned 2 or 3 moves at most, while Akainu and Kizaru have not learned all of them. Just as a new person joined, Zephyr took advantage of the situation and taught the 6 postures again. Of course, you don't have to learn all 6 moves. It depends on your personal situation. For someone like Kizaru, there is no need to learn Moonwalk. Sparkling Fruit gives him an innate ability to move in the air that is stronger than Moonwalk. Among the 6 poses, the one Kizaru masters best is the finger pistol, as it greatly increases the power of the lasers he emits with his fingers. Gigi carefully watched Zephyr explain the 6 postures one after another, and immediately excluded Iron Body and Paper Arts from his mind. Among them, Paper Arts is the most useless to him, because with his strength of knowledge, he cannot use this skill at all. As for the rest of the Iron Body, isn't this an illusion? Except for these 2, the remaining 4 postures are of great help to Gigi. Finger Pistol and Tempest Kick make up for Gigi's current lack of single-target attack weaknesses, while Shaft and Moonwalk can greatly improve Gigi's mobility. After Zephyr finished speaking above, he disbanded the team and asked the students to consolidate what they had learned. He himself came to Gigi and prepared to teach in person. After all, Gigi and the other 3 came late, so it's understandable that Zephyr would start a small business. He looked at the 3 Gigi in front of him and asked, "Did you understand what I just said? Do you need me to demonstrate it to you again?" Ginny and Shang both nodded, but Gigi didn't speak. Zephyr thought that Gigi was digesting what he had just learned, so he did not disturb him and started to guide Ginny and the bear first. He started talking about shaving. Just in the middle of his words, Gigi suddenly moved. I saw his feet clicking on the ground at a speed that was difficult to discern with the naked eye, and then his body moved several meters away in an instant. Seeing this scene, Zephyr's movements stopped abruptly, and some students who saw it also stood stunned on the spot. Akainu grabbed Kizaru's fist and said sideways, "Is that shaving? Gigi has already learned it." However, he was not too surprised. The use of the 6 moves depends on one's physical fitness. The stronger the physical fitness, the faster one can learn it, especially the simple moves like shaving. Gigi himself didn't think it was anything. He tried it a few more times, getting faster and faster, and in the end, it even produced an afterimage in place. This performance makes some students who have not yet mastered shaving make them want to cry and cry out that God is unfair. Ginny tilted her head and said to Zephyr, "Teacher Zephyr, how about we go directly to Brother Gigi to learn it later? You can jump directly to the next pose." "Ah, okay, actually shaving is a very basic move. Once you master shaving, it means that your leg and foot strength is up to standard, and you can perform Moonwalk and Tempest Kick." Aha! A cyan/wave crossed half of the training ground and landed on the wall at the edge, leaving a deep crack on it. Seeing Gigi poofing in the air, Zephyr no longer knew what to say. In less than a cup of tea, GJ had already learned 3 of the 6 poses before most of the students even finished their warm-up exercises. This kind of talent is simply unheard of, already in the realm of monsters. Some people were already kneeling on the training ground, thinking about the meaning of their existence. GJ frowned in midair and said to himself, "It's not powerful enough. Try this again." Crack. GJ stepped hard in the air and flew straight into the sky. In the process, his left foot burst out with a ball of violent lightning, and then kicked it downwards. Tempest kick Reikiri. Aha! A crescent-shaped slash wave entwined with electric arcs fell from the sky and landed on the ground, triggering a violent explosion. Raging electric light spewed out from it, illuminating the dull faces on the field. Landing smoothly, GJ looked at the big black pit on the ground, and finally a satisfied smile appeared on his face. This should be the effect he wanted. Zephyr was already numb. He waved his hand feebly and said, "You two go directly to GJ. These 3 moves are enough for you to learn for a while." Ginny cheered and happily pulled the bear and ran towards GJ. After a while, many people had gathered around GJ. The flying squirrel looked at the big hole that GJ kicked out and said to himself, "Mr. Zephyr didn't teach you this trick." Huo Shaoshan, who was in a better mood, patted his shoulder and said sincerely, "Don't look at it. If you look at it again, it will only make you more upset. We just have to practice our own skills. Don't compare with GJ. He is not the same type of person as us." Ginny didn't care about this. She stood beside GJ and said softly, "Brother GJ, Teacher Zephyr asked us to come to you, so I'm going to trouble you today." When Shang saw this situation, he immediately said, "Brother GJ, you can teach Ginny first. I will just practice on my own." GJ nodded and found a corner with Ginny to start one-on-one guidance. Ginny followed suit carefully, swinging her long white legs back and forth in front of GJ, making GJ's blood surge. He shook his head and told Ginny some of the key steps without any distractions. However, Ginny's mind did not seem to be on this. Rather than learning, it was better to say that she was deliberately showing off herself. Seeing that GJ just wasn't on the right track, while GJ was correcting her posture, Ginny bit her teeth lightly and suddenly did a high leg lift. This caused her body to become unbalanced. Her calves were placed directly on GJ's shoulders, and her upper body was tilted in one direction. GJ subconsciously reached out and hugged her waist to stabilize her body. The two stood there in a very weird posture. Ginny's face was pressed tightly against GJ's chest. The strong heartbeat made her feel hot all over and her breathing became heavy. GJ himself felt uncomfortable. Ginny's figure was so good. If he didn't react at such a close contact, he would have to follow Ivan in the future. Taking a deep breath, GJ carefully moved her shoulders, trying to get Ginny to lower her legs first. However, Ginny had no intention of cooperating. There was a cunning look in her eyes. She took advantage of GJ to relax and used her strength again. The two of them fell backwards close to each other. I hope everyone will support it and subscribe more.